particular that really served as a little bit of a inspiration for us here as well. Tennessee was was like the first one that we really engaged, and Mississippi. Interestingly enough, the state of Mississippi, for decades, has had the worst reading results in the nation. Every other state that was doing poorly would always say, at least we're not as bad as Mississippi. Mississippi has leaked over almost all the states across the nation. And it is because they locked into this. They were doing what we were doing before. They had a lot of balanced literacy. They had a lot of allowing every school district to do what they thought worked well because you know your kids best. You figure it out. All of these answers should come closer to the local community. So what you had were dozens of different approaches. And as an entire state, it did not work. And they continued to languish. And it was when they made a decision that we're going to create a focus around the science of reading. We're going to eliminate all these choices. We're going to vet the system. We're going to pick the stuff that works best for us, that's already proven, and we're going to ensure that everybody gets the level of professional development and support together with working with the unions. That has, they refer to it as the Mississippi miracle, how much they have improved. And Tennessee, similar kinds of results. So we've been engaged. We've spoken to their head schools of their commissioners of education and those who are really driving this work. So we've been in conversation with them as well as others in this space. Is there something that you wanted to add on that too?
I'll actually let DC Rex talk a little bit about our partnership with the states, in part because she was actually able to invite folks to come in and speak to the superintendents directly, so I'll let her talk a little bit about that. What I did want to mention is we're also learning from institutions around us, local districts and what they're doing, but also visiting some of the private organizations and schools, right? To find the practices, as you just heard Chancellor say, what works and what doesn't, so that we can learn from that, and then we know that people pay attention to New York City. It's important for us to get this right. And with the size of our district, we can't afford not to do the right thing. We also know that each of our districts are incredibly different, and we want to make sure we're providing the right supports across the variety and the diversity of student bodies that we have in each of our boroughs. And we want to make sure that we have the right types of supports in place. We learned, for example, we took a group of superintendents and their teams to the AIM Institute in Philadelphia, and we're able to see many of those practices integrated into the content areas so that you don't have to separate learning of reading through the explicit and systematic processes from really building content knowledge and still having the opportunity to have an inquiry-based classroom where you're really building experiences and schema, that instead those things can actually be connected and combined. And so we want to be able to create spaces that look like that as well. And so we're partnering with different kinds of organizations. So taking a look at wherever we can learn about what to do and what not to do. Donica, if you want to talk about this.
Yes, most notable to share, we had Penny Schwinn from Tennessee join one of our superintendent meetings, and she live streamed in. And it was an amazing opportunity for our superintendents to ask some real poignant questions around the change management. And she shared great resources with us as well. She provided us with some model tools that they used, and we were able to use those to help us and guide us with the work. We're always looking for models of where this work has happened so that we can adjust what we're doing to ensure that we're impactful.
Thank you. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Gutierrez. I wanted to find out, earlier you mentioned you had 100 interventionists. What happens when one of them leaves the school? What's the plan?
Sorry, I had to figure out the mic there. Part of that was what I had mentioned, that we're asking the schools actually to build the capacity from within. So we have those 960 centrally funded interventionists that are across our schools. We also have the just over 100 interventionists that we have right now in those phase 1 schools. Many schools already have identified interventionists, so they have speech teachers, they have different types of coordinators that they've identified. And I've even seen models when we visited schools where the schools have actually actually allocated intervention and enrichment during a period, and so every teacher becomes an interventionist through one of their programs that they're using. So Spire, Rewards, Starry, right? And so they're actually creating a system where every teacher does this work, and part of that is just about training. We were actually able to do much of that through what the City Council had funded through MSQI, and we've learned a lot about what it means to create those intervention blocks in that way and continue to build those resources. But it's really important for us, particularly because we don't know the future of our budgets, to build the capacity from within, and because we don't want this to be an initiative. This needs to be a systemic shift. As you heard Chair Abreu say, right, we made a shift a long time ago that actually had negative impact on many students, and so we need to make sure that we're breaking those behaviors, we're building new ones, and this means a systemic shift in the way that we structure our schools, our school days, our staffing, and we ensure that we're building sustainability from within.
You mentioned Spire. I like Spire. I was trained on it. Yeah, I do. Please provide an update on the status of districts under phase 1 of the initiative. How often do teachers receive coaching support? I know you talked about that, but you can just repeat it for me. And how are you collecting feedback from teachers, administrators about the new curriculum? And if so, what are some of the feedbacks you're hearing, and how do you plan on addressing any concerns?
So phase 1 is running very smoothly at this point, and it is because of the feedback loops that we have. We meet with our superintendents on a weekly basis in phase 1. We have a 30-minute call with them. We talk about what's working, what's not working. We're making adjustments to what's not working. We're providing them also with opportunities to see the practice in action. So we've organized our superintendent meetings so that we are going out. I'll give you a concrete example. We recently went out to District 24 and District 30. We broke up our superintendents into small groups. They went into classrooms to see the work in action and then to come back and to debrief, because it's really important for us that we're norming the work and we're making adjustments as we go. When we came back together, we all shared the feedback, and we gave the superintendent some next steps about the work that they're engaged in with their district. That is professional development on the ground, working. We're ensuring our superintendents are getting that. At the school level, it's working out in a number of different ways. But what we have ensured is that from September to now, every school has had 5.5 days of professional development coaching at the school level. By the end of the year, they'll have a minimum of 17 days of professional development coaching at the school level. So we're ensuring that it's ongoing. It's not just a one and done, that we have multiple paths of professional development and enrichment for our teachers. We're continuing to receive feedback from CSA. We meet with them monthly to ensure, because we don't hear it all the time from the superintendents. We need to triangulate the information as it comes in, which I often say. And so we are listening to what they're saying, and we're taking that into consideration. Yeah. Hugh?
I also wanted, go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So slightly different for early childhood, but all the same good stuff. As you heard the Chancellor mention, the majority of the early childhood portfolio is part of what we would call phase 1. So it's been an absolutely wonderful launch to this work. And even those that are not technically part of phase 1, they've been part of every single piece of professional learning, coaching, materials, so that as we transition into phase 2 for next year, everyone feels very well prepared and very well equipped to make that move. You had mentioned, Chair Joseph, what does coaching look like? And I know we've all talked a little bit about it, but I would say that as we talk about our labor partners and the significant role that they've played in this work in shaping professional learning for our educators, we'd be remiss if we didn't talk about the wonderful role that they've played, incredible role, in really shaping the work that's happening with our coaches, right? So when we think about that significance of a coach with both our teachers and with our leaders, I personally have just had an absolutely just privileged opportunity to work closely with the UFT in shaping what that looks like for our instructional coordinators, right? And so Karen Alford has been, I'll give her a shout out, just absolutely amazing. I know Mary's here. Mary, you have been amazing for K-5. And with the CSA, Rosie Sinclair has been just an incredible thought partner. And so when we think about like, what does that feedback look like? You know, we are adjusting in real time. Children don't get a do-over. You know, as Councilmember Abreu has said, right? The impact that this work has on children in real time. You don't get a second chance at being 2, you don't get a second chance at being 3, 4, or 8. So we owe it to our kids to get it right. And so we can't wait a year from now and figure out if it's really working. As things are happening in real time, we are adjusting. And so that feedback comes both from UFT and CSA. It comes from weekly meetings that are happening with our coaches, with their own coach, so that they're feeling supported. And then it's coming from all of the professional learning and coaching that's happening. Our educators, our leaders have an opportunity to give feedback. And we use that to really inform policy, practice, and systems that are in place. Chair Joseph, thank you for attending our first ever leadership summit over the summer. People are still talking about your presence there. I think the chancellor might be a little jealous because they talk about you being there more than him. But it was the first ever, and this is what's important. You've heard the chancellor say this a few times. The first ever time that we've brought together all leaders across early childhood. Principals and assistant principals, our program leaders from our CBOs and our non-public schools, because we're serving the same children. And so when you hear the chancellor talk about that cohesion, that coherence, we want to ensure that no matter where that child is, no matter what zip code they're in, no matter what borough they're in, no matter what program they're in, that they're getting the same high quality. And so all of that plays a part in the feedback and the support. So thank you again.
And Deputy Chancellor didn't tell you this is her last day. We want to thank you for. Yeah.
Thank you for your service, right?
We've had that experience with Chair Joseph at our visits too. They're more
She's
excited about
amazing.
her being there than about the visit. So
No, Chair Joseph is absolutely
we're gonna have to
amazing.
invite you, Chair Abreu.
Thank you.
I also wanted to add, so we collected survey data in the spring after our teachers were trained and our leaders were trained, and much of that information helped us structure the coaching and make decisions about partnership allocations and supports. A little bit like using an exit ticket at the end of a lesson, right, where you figure out what you're going to do next. And we just actually sent out another survey. So we just sent out a survey to ask about coaching and professional learning so that we can find out what we need to do a little bit differently, not only with the folks who are in phase 1, but also as we're about to launch phase 2. And so it gives us the information that we need to tweak. We're also collecting information, though, through many forms of other data. So we're looking at screener data, and that actually gives the teacher information about how well they are following the curriculum and whether or not students are progressing along different skills that they need to be learning. It tells the principal what kind of support a teacher may need, and so we look at that. And with screeners, we're actually looking at other information, like in year 1 of the screeners, we had an 89% completion rate. Year 2, 92% completion rate. And this year, 92%, but that's only because District 24 is doing a pilot for us where they're actually piloting a screener that is in both Spanish and English, and so their numbers don't count. But those numbers are 98% completion rate. And so every year we increase the number of folks who are actually using the screeners, which is a testament to how important that information is for us to do things like provide intervention supports. We collect information through our visits, and I think that's the most important way. You get lots of fantastic stories, but you also get to see when folks are making meaning. Are they actually shifting what their classroom libraries look like to be about genre or to create context for knowledge building instead of levels? Do they now have different things on the wall? So instead of word walls that focus on letters, are they actually focusing on sounds where you have phonemes and graphemes up on the walls, right? And so through the visits, we get to see whether or not folks have made meaning and how they are progressing through the curriculum and whether or not they have the right resources up so that kids are building those practices and skills along the way too. And so we collect that and we bring it here. There are also folks in the room that don't hesitate to give us feedback. We have partners who we call for feedback and others who just give it to us anyway. So it's really, really important, though, that we use that information. And I think, you know, you've been part of the Literacy Advisory Council is one of those bodies that actually collects information for us very deliberately. And the Literacy Advisory Council has many sub-councils, so we get to hear about data collection, we get to hear about parental involvement, we get to hear about secondary supports, about dyslexia through these sub-councils, and that they feed us that information so we know what's working, what's not, what questions are coming up. And actually, because this Literacy Advisory Council is made up of experts, teachers, students, parents, just a wide range of folks who are invested in or know about literacy, we actually have resources built in. And so it's been really helpful to be, I think, learners in this space and to be humble about such a big shift, because we have to be willing to be flexible and make sure we get it right. And I think that we've taken the right stance.
We've messed up reading for so long, we can't mess it up now. Question is, D75, are they included in this training for the educators? It's very important we do not leave our students with disabilities out of this conversation. So can you tell me what we're doing, what type of training are you providing for D75 educators?
The same training that we're providing for all of our other leaders and teachers, we're providing to District 75. We have high expectations for our students in District 75, just like all of our students, and so we were very intentional in ensuring that they're getting the same quality of professional development that we have for everyone else. And we have, it's also important to note that we have 22 schools in District 75 that are part of Phase 1 as well, and we will expand that in Phase 2.
That was my next question, but thank you. So please provide an update on status of districts under Phase 2 initiatives. How many Phase District 2 have made the curriculum purchase already? If you can, please provide the list of those districts. How many Phase 2 districts have identified a model classroom in each school to receive professional learning? Please provide a list of those districts and the name of the school serving as models.
So we are at the tail end of the engagement process for Phase 2. And what that means is by January 1st, we will know what their selection has been. And that is important because we gave them additional time to engage their community adequately. And that engagement looked very different across many districts. Some had town halls, ongoing town halls, some had curriculum experts come in and share the different curriculum options with them. They went and they visited different districts with their teachers, with their principals, with families. So it was very important to us that they had adequate time to make a decision in collaboration with school communities. So the selection will be made by January 1st, and at that point, they will start to receive samples of the curriculum that they can then launch in their districts. And then we will begin professional development in the spring, similar to what we did with our Phase 1. And the cycle will continue. Summer professional development, continuing to engage, ensuring that they get all of their materials before the start of the school year, just as we did with Phase 1, and ensuring that the professional development continues in the fall of 2024. So we are knee-deep in that right now, ensuring that we have the right systems and structures and support, more importantly, for our Phase 2 districts.
And it's been great to see. So we'll provide you the list. And if there's anything on the model classrooms that we want to speak to. But it's been exciting for me to see the superintendents all visiting each other across the city, all taking a deeper look and bringing teams with them as well as they've been doing their due diligence on making this selection as part of this process. It's been very exciting for the whole school system.
I'm sorry, Chair. You asked about the model classrooms. So in District 1, I have to shout out District 1, Superintendent Chan, Dr. Chan, she is Phase 2, and she did something really amazing in her district. She brought the entire community together to norm. What are the practices that we want to see in classrooms? Because as she begins to launch, she wants to be able to have model classrooms in her district. And so she wanted to set a clear expectation about what she wants to see in her classrooms, and that is an exemplary model that we shared with all of our superintendents who are in phase 2 as a best practice. So it's looking different in every district, but we are providing them with sample best practices that they can scale across their district.
I'm going to ask the hard question for Chancellor. This all sounds amazing. With budget cuts, how is this going to look?
This is our priority, right? And so as we are reviewing all of these potential things that have to be cut, we are making this our number one priority. So tough choices that have to be made, but this is the legacy work for this administration, and we're going to ensure that the supports that are needed for kids to read is going to be there. Because as far as I'm concerned, there are lots of other programs that we have that are wonderful and amazing programs, and it breaks my heart to have to look at cutting anything. But if kids can't read, none of the rest of the stuff really matters. And so I want to make sure that we are fully locked in on NYC Reads. It is the Chancellor's number one priority, and so this is what we will fight the hardest to protect.
But at the same token, I'm going to be Ms. Joseph right now. Social safety nets are also important. We can't teach reading to an empty building. So we got to keep in mind as we building this out, the things that make New York City kids come to school, that some of them are also in place, that they're in place to make them come to the building. As much as you and I may love reading, we want everybody reading, but remember the safety nets have to be in place for New York City kids to be able to come and read, or no one is going to be reading the curriculum.
Well, that's why we need the council to fight for these cuts for us. I'm not instituting any cuts.
Neither am I. It's the mayor. It's not me. It's your boss.
Well, you all work together to negotiate a budget, and so I work with the budget that I'm given, and with the budget that I'm given, I'm just letting you know publicly, a priority for me will be the reading. And it doesn't mean that's the only thing that we're going to do, read and go home. No, there's a lot of stuff that we have to do. But we do know, as you all know, right, that we got some major challenges in front of us, major challenges, financial challenges. There's so many programs that we've done that have been so important. I think NYC Summer Rising was amazing. We saw the impacts of that. You know, our ability to be able to do 110,000 students next year like we just did, we could have done 150,000. That's what the demand was. Are we going to have the funding in place to be able to do that? I don't think we will, but I'm anxious to see, as you all engage in this process as well, what the ultimate budget will be that New York City Public Schools is going to be given to work with, and then we'll do as best we can from there.
One last question before I pass it on. A recent New York University report found that a HMH curriculum currently used by 13 out of the 15 Phase 1 district is culturally destructive as it perpetuates stereotypes. Did the 2021-2022 formal review of curriculum relieve any issues regarding the curriculum lack of cultural responsiveness? And how are you working with HMH to address this issue? Yeah,
that's a great question. You know, we looked very, very closely at that review. We didn't fully agree with that review given what we saw, but we have worked very closely with HMH to fill in some of those gaps. I certainly am not going to stand as a chancellor providing curricular options for our kids that are just wholly, culturally unresponsive. That goes against the grain of everything that I'm all about. So we've worked very closely with HMH. We think they're doing a greater job because we've got this magnificent team here that are holding their feet to the fire. But I think it's important to know, and I want everybody to know, even those that are not here from the council, the curriculum itself is a tool. The magic is not in the curriculum. The curriculum is a basic foundation for us. The magic is in the training and how we're showing up. And we will continue to add to the curriculum and build on it. It's one of the reasons I mentioned some of the things, particularly a lot of this work that Deputy Chancellor Quintana is leading. We're adding stuff all the time. So it's not one thing in a bottle and it's like, wow, this one curriculum doesn't have. There's no curriculum that has everything that you're looking for. The answer is in our connectedness to each other and making sure that we're hearing the voices from across the entire city because there are curricula that has been called culturally responsive, and then when you do the analysis, it's culturally responsive to certain cultures.
Correct.
We live in the most diverse city in the world. And if you want every child to be seen and to be affirmed, that's a huge body of work. But that's a body of work we need to be committed to. And you will never find that in any one canned program. It comes through the magic of the people who bring culture to life and take anything that's on paper and said, now let's make it really matter. And that's why the training for our adults is critically important. We're looking at a Middle East crisis that's happening right now that has visited itself and its impact in all of our New York City communities and certainly in our schools. And I'm dealing with those issues every single day. Issues of anti-Semitism, issues of Islamophobia, which are wholly unacceptable. But I can say it's unacceptable. The way that you address it is how you teach the kids. But when you're relying on the adults to teach the kids, who's teaching the adults? Who bring their own biases very often. We have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
But I do believe that we can get there, but it needs the right kind of leadership, the right kind of support, and people need to know that they should believe and trust in the leadership and our ability to work together, and that's what we're trying to do.
Absolutely. Thank you. I wanted to acknowledge Councilmember Hanks, and now I'm going to pass it over to my co-chair.
And I would just say this, I'm sorry, I think we had shared that I was going to have a hard stop. I've got to get up to the Bronx, but you're in better hands with the deputies who are driving this work each and every day. There's not one question that you would ask that I would know any better than they would know. But I would just like to just say in closing, I very much appreciate the leadership of this council at large, and I certainly appreciate my councilman, Abreu, and I want to thank you very much for even pushing to make this session happen today, this hearing. And I know how personal it is to you, and I want you to know that we are fighting on behalf of all the Sean Abreus all across this system, that they don't get held back, that they get what they're supposed to get. And we're going to do everything that we possibly can. And we think this is like the best place that we can start by ensuring that by third grade, if every Sean Abreu in the whole city of New York learns how to read, just think about the possibilities of what they can do from there. And Chair Joseph, who is just my ultimate partner, she's with us everywhere. I think she's the only council member, I think probably in history, who's ever gone directly from a classroom to chair the education committee for the city council. That is historic, but what it is she brings a lens of what it really means to be in these schools. And that matters to us. And even as you ask the tough questions to us, it makes all the difference in the world, right? And so we appreciate all of you.
Shaker might have come from the classroom too.
Did he go straight from the classroom? You're the first woman to go straight from the classroom to the...
See, he knows.
Thank you so much, Chairs. Thank you so much, all the members of the committee, and I appreciate all of you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chancellor Banks.
Thank you, Chancellor. Well, thank you, Chair Joseph. I have a question with regard to the Mississippi Miracle and figuring out things that work there and things that may have been different in terms of its implementation here in New York City. So starting in 2013, the state passed a series of bills to overhaul their teaching methods in Mississippi. At the outset of its transformation, Mississippi funded coaches for each of the state's poorest performing schools, helping teachers apply lessons from the letters training. The coaches provided monthly reports on their work to keep principals and state officials informed. They also provided professional development and online learning for schools without coaches. As a result of these efforts, Mississippi was the only state that improved fourth grade reading scores on the 2019 National Assessment of Educational Progress. They went from 21% of fourth grade students scoring as proficient in reading in 2013 to 32% in 2019. This has been dubbed as the Mississippi Miracle. What lessons has the administration taken from this and incorporated into your own program, but have done differently as well?
I'll take a stab at that one. Thank you for, I appreciate, one, the sort of the scope of everything that they did. One thing that I do want to point out, and you all know this, New York City is huge. right? We're bigger than the whole state of Mississippi. And so thinking about the way that we roll this initiative out, we have to be really careful about scale, and we have to be really careful in terms of the relationship that we have with the state, with our partners, with the universities that exist here. But we did take a page from their book, right? We made sure that all of our leaders received the training, actually through letters very specifically, but we also offered other forms of science of reading inductions, right? We wanted to make sure that folks had an understanding of what shift we were about to make before we actually made the curricular shift and the pedagogical shift, so that they could have a sense of what it was that we were going to do. As you mentioned, coaching was a really big part of their success. They were able to get that support from the state. It would be fantastic to actually have funding from our city, from our state, from wherever it is, to be able to afford coaches for everyone. But what we've done is build from within, right? And so we were able to, one, bring in third-party vendors because we don't have enough people. And then we took what we did have and put it in places that are really strategic for us. So I'd mentioned the interventionist, the implementation specialists, the academic intervention support folks. And so we've placed the people who had that kind of capacity already in very strategic positions to support us at the district level and at the school level, so that we can actually have that breadth of support across, we're talking about 16 districts that already are probably the size of their entire state, right? And so what does it mean to be able to provide that? We also are looking at our data and are seeing that through intervention, which is where we're really focusing in, we're going to have results like this. We're going to close the gap of the students that are being identified. We've already actually seen that. Students identified as at risk who may have been thought to have a dyslexic profile have actually been able to move out of that at-risk category already through intervention alone. We've seen examples and have heard stories at schools where students who were in a 12 to 1-to-1 setting through intensive intervention have now been recommended for ICT. Where a student who was considered, right, exactly, thank you, that is worth clapping for, who may have needed or would have needed to be put in a different sort of program for that kind of intensive support, was able to receive the intensive support over time. And we're talking about the difference of students who need 10 times the support and students who need 30 times the support, right? We're able to build that sort of tiered model across our schools, and we're trying different things in different spaces because we also have a much larger population of English language learners, and we need to be really thoughtful about the kids that we have in our schools and the kind of supports that they need. So we're learning from states like Mississippi, and we're also taking into consideration what we have available here and what we can build. And our teams, fortunately, are working very well together because we can't do it without the superintendents investing. We can't do it without making sure that our labor partners are involved, right? And so all of our team, which is actually, that's another first, that our central office is working so well together and really breaking down silos so that each of us are playing a role in making sure that this NYC Reads isn't just an initiative, it is a change to our system as a whole.
Yeah, I would just add, we are standing on the shoulders of many different people that have come before us in doing this work. And so to Deputy Chancellor Quintana's point, we are definitely taking those lessons learned, but also they're real promising practices that have proven to be effective. I think what makes us unique and different is that when the Chancellor made this commitment to grounding our work in the body of research called the science of reading, we also made a very clear commitment and very early on that this was also going to be inclusive of our youngest children, which does separate us from the norm and really inject a very healthy dose of difference that you may not see elsewhere. But that's also because we have this grand opportunity here in New York City to begin with our youngest learners and recognizing that we cannot build a house starting on the second floor. It begins with young children. And if we do this, and we do this well very early on, we will not be playing catch up in third grade, right? We will not be looking for quick fixes and fast interventions, doing a sprint to get some maybe immediate results, but not necessarily sustainable results to really build confident and competent readers and lifelong readers. And so that is also something that's very unique that we're adding on to the lessons that we're learning from states like Mississippi. They were able to, for many different reasons, not necessarily because of lack of will, but maybe just because of their own resources of providing coaches to low-performing districts. In early childhood, every single teacher, every single leader, so we're talking over 8,000 classrooms. We're talking hundreds and hundreds of elementary schools. Thousands of our contracted programs has access to a coach, right? That's huge. And we believe, right? I think part of our own philosophical stance is that coaching isn't just for those that are not doing well. Coaching is for all of us to continue stretching and growing our own professional work so that we could do the best possible for every single child that stands in front of us.
Thank you. And one thing that was present with the Mississippi Miracle was a dedicated state budget for this. What budgetary assistance from the state especially could help further the implementation and support for students with learning disabilities? And is the absence of that resource hampering your ability to implement your program?
That's not a question I'm prepared to answer, but I do want to say that at this time, I don't feel that we're hampered, right? We're 3 months in. We're really doing what we can with what we have. I think that we're already seeing success. We're seeing a shift in teacher practice. We're seeing a shift in the way that principals actually talk about instruction. NYC Reads is directly aligned to our citywide instructional priority of making sure that every student has a high quality academic experience that leads to deeper learning, where students are taught to think critically and solve complex problems, and that they are taught in a space, as Chair Joseph, as you suggested, of belonging and inclusivity, and that's happening across the board. When we hear principals and teachers ask us for additional ways to do this work that really meets the needs of their specific populations, we know they're being thoughtful about it, and I would say that that's success. And we continue to evolve. I think that's really, really important. I sat actually in an arts function earlier today where I heard Commissioner Curry actually talk, not Commissioner Curry, sorry. No, but I'll remember in just a second because it was arts. But we talked about needing to evolve, right? How important it is to evolve as a system, and that's what's happening. We're seeing that already. We're seeing that across the board. We're seeing that with all of our schools. We're seeing that at the central office, the way that we're talking about teaching and learning as a whole. So, you know, a school system is never going to say no to additional support, but I think that given what resources we have and what we know, we're absolutely making it happen.
And I just want to add that we can't do this work without our parents as well. And so engaging, that was something else that we learned, engaging our families in this process was really critically important to us as well. Again, I'm going to give you another example because I'm all about going to see the best practices. But we have in District 25, where they have Welcome Wednesdays, where and they're part of Phase 1, where their families come into the school and actually see lessons in action. And then following observing the lesson, they go into the auditorium with the principal and they debrief and talk about what did you see and what can the extensions be for at home. So again, you know, that is a best practice that we lifted from Mississippi, and we are collecting all of those types of best practices to ensure that we can leverage them for our Phase 2 districts.
Commissioner Cumbo, Cultural Affairs.
I have one last question before I pass it back over to Chair Joseph. There are various bills at the state level currently in committee that are in relation to screening for learning disabilities, particularly dyslexia and dysgraphia. Some require longer continuous screening, such as the New York Individuals with Dyslexia Act, which requires annual screenings for all students in grades K through 5. Others only require annual screenings up until the 2nd grade. Do you know of any advantages or disadvantages to longer continuous testing?
The question is about screening for dyslexia, right? Yep.
Yes.
So
Longer continuous testing.
Yep. So the way that the screeners work is once we've had students who've gone through a round of screening, we provide them with intervention. If we don't see that the student is making progress, then they'll receive a second round of screen or a secondary screener, right? A more intensive screener. What's important there actually becomes both the intensity of the intervention and the continuous monitoring. And so what that looks like is the interventionist really paying attention to whether or not the child is making progress on those particular skills. And so if that's what you're talking about in terms of the length of screening that happens, we're talking about students who, in this case I had mentioned earlier, may need 30 times the type of intensity in terms of intervention. And so there are students who will necessarily have more attention paid to what they're doing, and that monitoring looks like additional assessing that happens along the way.
Thank you.
Of course.
Okay, Councilmember Narcisse, and then followed by Councilmember Gutierrez. Oh, also acknowledging Councilmember Menon.
One of the things that I was about to ask, you answered that for me too, is about parents' engagement. We have to keep in mind, that's a little statement here, that some folks really don't have the education to support their own children. That's why we, and the chair of education, always pushing for libraries, for different things. So that's when culture come in to understand all that. So I'm so appreciative. And the collaboration, I'm so appreciative of that. I could have danced for this, because I'm a mother of 4 children, and I know for a fact, yes, I went back 4 times. It's a fact that kids need, I see more parents here that have 4 that look, yes, we have a lot of children here. So education is everything, and I am so grateful. And one of my questions is, what metrics? I know you kind of learned to, to it, that definitely. So I want to ask you, what metric system that you're using to measure the progress of this curriculum? It's a great curriculum, by the way. I'm not judging it, but I want to know how you're going to know it's working.
So we're actually collecting data through a number of ways. We have a tool that's been put together that will help us actually go in and look at the curricular implementation in a very developmental way. And so that's just about making sure that the resources that we have and the strategies that we need are happening across our classrooms. We're also, though, collecting data in terms of the screeners. And those screeners give us information about whether or not, those are very specific classroom data. That gives us information about whether or not the teacher is progressing through the curriculum and through the building of skills the way they need to, and it lets the principal know if the teacher needs additional support to help the kids make progress through those skills. Those screeners then give us information too about groupings for intervention, both in Tier 1, so in the general classroom, and for Tier 2 interventions. Those interventions generate data, and we're collecting that information as well, and that's actually some of that information that I had mentioned, where we're seeing children who've been recommended either out of certain settings in terms of placement for special education, or they've already been, they were able to make it, they were considered severely at risk, and were able to get out of that category because they advanced through whatever would be the foundational level of literacy, and that's the kind of information that we want to see, that kids are making progress to close. Mostly it's that gap, right? When we think about, when we want to make progress on, for example, the state assessments, which we will look at as well, but that's lagging data. Usually what we want to do is close the number of students who are scoring level 1 and increase the number of students, obviously, who are scoring at proficiency level, but first you need to close that gap of students who are scoring at level 1. We're doing that already with the interventions. We're closing the number of students who are coming up as at risk, and that's already in 3 months, tremendous efforts. And so that kind of data that we're collecting qualitative data as well.
Qualitative.
Yep, I mentioned that we put out a survey in the spring. We just administered a survey, actually just got put out, I think, this week. Is that right? So just this week, for teachers and leaders to give us feedback on professional learning and coaching, and how their sense of self-efficacy in terms of the curriculum. So we're looking at it from a number of ways. And then we also have a whole team, actually, that does policy and analysis of data. And some of the funders who are funding our partners have also invested in having some research done. So we're looking at case studies, and we'll also have some information about implementation. So a range of different ways, because we need to make sure that implementation is leading to.
It seems like my question is taking all my time. One question,
Sorry,
but I have others. What role would parents, I think I'm getting to where you're going. What role would parents play, which we asked about that, But you told me that parents going to be engaged throughout, right? And I'm hoping that every trend that I get in New York City, I'm going to see parents reading, I'm going to see the children reading. So what does your budget look like for marketing, promoting this curriculum?
I can't speak to the budget, but I can tell you a little bit about the ways that we're involving parents. And that looks like a number of different resources, activities, and opportunities. So the Family and Community Engagement team has put together resources for parents to be able to engage in this process with the schools. They also, this past summer, for example, did the Summer Streets, where they had a bus go out, or it was a minivan, that actually provided books and did read-alouds and things like that for parents to engage them. We're inviting parents into different functions to learn about the curriculum. The curricula all come with information that goes out to parents and with online resources as well. And our team put together resources for schools to know how to work alongside parents. I don't know if you want to add something.
If I may, so I really appreciate your question around the ways in which we're engaging families, partnering with families, but also recognizing that all families are also entering our school system at all different levels and all different levels of being comfortable in the ways that they're engaging around their children's education. And that's our job, is to figure that out and to be able to respond to that, right? And so when we think about families, and as a former teacher, a former principal, and interacting with countless families across the years, and knowing that all families don't enter this school system in the same way that others may, right? In reading and feeling comfortable in reading, or English as their first language. There are so many ways that families can engage with their child that are outside of just reading a book in order to build their literacy, in order to help literacy development for their own child. So we really want to make sure that families also understand this is a big piece of our work. One of the reasons in early childhood we selected the curriculum that we did in order because it had a huge family engagement component and a two-way communication system and mechanism already set up and built into it, and a number of resources that are absolutely free to families to understand that reading is one way to build children's literacy, but oral language development is one of the biggest predictors of children's reading skills in the later years. And so families, it's important for families to know, and especially those that may not be comfortable reading or that are learning to read themselves, that just talking with your child, right, especially in the early years, is huge. Talking with your child while you're walking to the bus or to the subway, what you're seeing on the way to the park, and in your home language. Really, really huge, right? And very, very important. Building that language proficiency in a child's primary language will help them build proficiency in another language. Writing with your child is also a huge piece to building literacy development. So, making a list of what we're going to do on the weekend, making that food shopping list together, writing to a loved one. All of those pieces combined are really, really important. Families are children's first teacher, and they are their forever teacher.
That's right.
And it doesn't
That's
matter where
right.
their literacy is. And you can't tell my mother different. She is still my teacher at this age. So.
And I'm so happy because we live in a diverse city, diverse linguistics background. So I'm hoping that all that can incorporate, and then we can lead by example. So I thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Gutierrez.
Thank you, Chair. Good to see everyone this morning. I have a couple of questions. I also agree. I think this initiative is really incredible. I really appreciate the effort, the comprehensiveness of how important it is. I did also have a question on engagement and just a little bit more specific, and I think you alluded to this, Deputy Chancellor, about some, like my experience where my parents immigrated here. My mom got a 5th grade education and my dad had an 8th grade education. So the engagement part is, yes, engaging with parents and like making sure that they understand like the curriculum is different and their children will be taught a little differently. But I guess for non-English speaking parents, right? And I hear a mix in my community where, they get home really late and it's a lot of work for them to like kind of do that supportive work at home, but especially for those parents where English is not their first language, kind of where is the distinction of support for them? And I'm gonna read through my questions so that I can respect the time. So would love to, if you can answer that or if you can get that to us. The second question is related to how you were all thinking about PD and Chair Joseph and I had a joint hearing a couple months ago related to AI in our schools, and I'm really curious if this is a tool that you are all thinking about or are already doing. But I think the consensus from our hearing, both Chair Joseph and I think this is like a really good opportunity. And if you can speak to that, that would be wonderful. And then the last two questions, the Chancellor alluded to this in his statement about integrating CBOs. Is there any specifics that you can share, specifically our CBOs that are partnering with our schools in community school scenarios, for example? How are they being trained or integrated into this program? And then the last question is related to Cities First Readers, which is a wonderful initiative that the council has funded and continues to fund. And it really speaks to, I think, some of the goals in this program, which is really tackling literacy from 0 to 5. And I am very lucky in my own community. I was able to work with a Cities First Reader partner when my child was first born. And so curious if you are all working with the coalition of Cities First Readers, and what are some takeaways? What are some of their feedback? Because they've been funded. The council has been supporting them for a long time. I hope to continue to support them, but they've been speaking about this for a long time too, so would love to know how you guys are all working together. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. That's a lot of questions. Do you want to start?
Yeah.
4 questions.
It's
four
four-
questions.
No, they're great, and they're all. I'm excited actually about these questions.
4
But do you
really
wanna
good questions. We've got them written down, and I think we're ready to roll. Yeah. So thinking about supporting families and the resources that are available in different languages, right? So through the early childhood curriculum, there are a number of resources that are available to family, and each of those resources are available in English and Spanish, Arabic, in a number of different languages. I think over 7 or 9 languages for the modeled moment videos, which again are really supporting families in understanding how to extend that learning outside of school. So seeing experiences that actually happen in the classroom, the ways those can happen in the park, on the bus, or at home, but in multiple languages so that it's accessible for families. The same goes to all of the digital books that are available to families, again, through our curriculum and assessment, available in multiple languages. Again, another reason why these tools were actually selected, so that they had full-on access available and readily available in multiple languages for families so that they could also be part of that work. So if you want to speak a little to the K-5 piece.
Sure. For parents of L's, not very different, right? That we have translated materials, the resources are available in different languages, and if they're ever parents are coming into the school to speak with or to be part of open school nights and things like that, the interpretation that's available across the city is standard, right? In addition to that, though, something that Deputy Chancellor Ahmed said earlier, we encourage parents who speak to speak their heritage language to the students throughout. If they are readers in their heritage language, to do that as well. And a lot of what reading is, and I know that we joke that kids are going to leave age 3 or 3K reading. Really what kids are going to leave 3K doing it developmentally appropriately, most kids, is having reading behaviors. And that's what we want, right? And so parents can practice those reading behaviors regardless of language. Not only are we building sound fluency through practicing the speaking, but also practicing turning pages, practicing actually reading aloud in their heritage language. And so we want parents to continue to do that and to feel confident that that is going to contribute to the child's literacy development and their biliteracy, which is incredibly important. And for those of you who are bilingual and biliterate, you know that that actually is really good for your brain and your development, so we want that to continue to happen across our schools and to really honor and value what our kids bring as their strengths already. Aside from that, you had asked about community schools and whether or not they're part of the community schools that are part of the original districts of the Phase 1 districts or of the early childhood districts continue to be part of that as well, and they've been funded to have very specific support for core content area development. And so one of I mentioned earlier, our citywide instructional priority, the first lever in that citywide instructional priority that leads to deeper learning is to make sure that every school and every teacher has strong content knowledge. And that doesn't just mean I know math, it means I know how to teach math. So in this case, not just that I know reading, I know how to teach reading to every child in front of me so that I can anticipate where that child, that I have the right resources in place, and I can adjust the curriculum where needed to meet the needs of the students in front of me. And so those pieces.
Can I just clarify that?
Yeah,
And
yeah.
thank you. It was just on the CBO
CBOs.
piece specifically.
Oh, okay.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, and CBOs actually are a huge part of this work for us. So super exciting, not only in terms of supporting, but they're also very anxious to receive training in terms of NYC Reads. We've been working with them through our tutoring programs, including them in part of that work to develop those literacy skills, not so that they become literacy teachers, but so they're aware of what kids are learning and they can continue to foster that when they're there. The one part that I also wanted to respond to, and then I'll turn it over to you, Donica, is AI, because it falls under my team as well, and it's a really, really exciting part of the work that we're doing. We just launched an AI Policy Lab, which is a national initiative, and through the AI Policy Lab, we will be able to collect both guidance at the local and at the national level, and tools and resources so that we're creating a toolkit for leaders and educators. And part of what that also means for us is the development of resources that include inclusive technologies as a whole, AI and generative AI being part of that. And so we are already building a tool that works to help students engage more closely in math, and we're now in talks with the university, and we'll start the work very soon, not announced yet, to do the same for literacy. And so we're really, really excited about how we're using the technologies, and we already know that those technologies allow our students entry regardless of where they are in terms of language, in terms of literacy. And so we already have many schools using a range of technologies to give kids opportunities to practice, to build fluency, or to give them ways to engage in the class when they don't have the capacity to do so yet on their own. So really, really excited.
You don't have to fight about it. Whoever can answer.
We were saying, I took copious notes of your questions, so we're seeing if Deputy Chancellor Rux wanted to mention anything else about the integration of CBOs, but I think Deputy Chancellor Quintana covered it.
Oh, and we have CBOs in our Literacy Advisory Council as well. They're a big
Yes.
part of that. And the Reading Alliance also provides after-school support and foundational skills. So something else that, just to keep in mind that we have a range of ways. We can't do it alone. And so we're taking advantage of anyone who wants to help in that process, who's aligned in our thinking.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Some educators have expressed concern that the curriculum options are too rigid and incorporate difficult texts but are not differentiated, especially impacting Ls and SWDs. Is New York City Public Schools concerned about this issue? If so, how does the New York City Public Schools plan to address it?
That's a really important question because it's one that speaks to the importance of making meaning. When folks don't actually understand the shift that we're making, when they don't have the instructional strategies needed to actually read into grade level text and to help students access grade level text, that's the response. This is too hard, my kids can't. And that actually ends up, unfortunately, whether intentionally or not, being about low expectations. And so, we've used, again, research, right? There was a RAND report that showed us that when teachers were trained, that mindset shifted. When they actually had the resources to be able to do that, that mindset shifted. PS 125 actually received the support of the council. Thank you very much. I was able to visit them last year a few times. I had many meetings with their teachers, their union folks, their families, and then went back again this year. And the shift was incredible. I know I've talked to you a little bit about it before, and you've been there with me. But the shift in that particular school, to use as an example, teachers were afraid of what it meant, right? They'd been trained in a very different way. They were experts in what they knew, and they didn't know that the kids could actually access those texts. We saw a shift in their practices. Now, if you walk into their classrooms, they'll actually pull you in to show you how exciting it is and what their bins look like and what their classrooms look like and what they're doing. And one of the teachers actually said, I couldn't get the kids to read Now I actually have to pull the books away because they want to be part of the reading, right? It's easier to get them into those texts now. The texts are also exciting, the topics the kids really are engaged with. When we visited a school last week, the teacher said, and I found that some of the topics really engaged my boys who would have been reluctant, and some of the topics really engaged my girls in different ways, and not that we should genderify anything like that, but they're noticing that there are topics that engage the kids differently, and I think that that's incredibly important, that these books are exciting, the kids want to read into them, and the teachers now have the strategies to do it. So we don't want to make things more simplified because we're afraid that the kids can't access it. We need to be able to provide adequate supports for the students to be able to access. And that means for our English language learners that our teachers have those supports in front of them and that they know how to modify for the kids to meet. And for our students with disabilities, that we're thinking about things like pacing and the right sort of materials in front of them to help support as well, the technologies that we asked about earlier. And when necessary, we will absolutely and have already spoken with the vendors because we want to make sure New York City is a big city. We're on a big platform. We need to hold the vendors accountable as well. And so when necessary, we're having those conversations there too.
Thank you. One quick question. Do you keep data on your interventionists? And if you do, would you be able to share that data with the council?
What do you mean by data on the interventionists? On the results of the interventions?
Correct.
We are collecting data on the results of the interventions. We have some of that data already to demonstrate growth. I'm not sure, actually, if that's data that we can share, so I can get back to you on that. But let me get back to you on that one.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to recognize Councilmember Stevens, Ressler, and Rivera. Thank you. So my next question will be on dyslexia screening and intervention. So the term dyslexia screening has been used somewhat interchangeably to refer to universal screening of all students for reading challenges using tools like Adensia, as well as more in-depth secondary screening done as follow-up to initial assessment. Can you confirm that all schools are now conducting universal screening across all grade levels? If not, which school and which grade levels are conducting universal screening?
Thank you. Yes, so those numbers actually, the screeners, as I mentioned, we have a 92% completion rate for screeners for ELA, but that rate actually doesn't include the District 24 who are piloting Amplify M-Class screener in Spanish and English. For that group of students who are piloting that are over 11,000 students, we have a 98% completion rate for them. So we're pretty happy with the completion rate in terms of screeners. As far as interventions, we saw that last year we actually piloted intensive interventions, and so the number was much smaller. But this year we have over 300 schools that receive intensive intervention support, so students have access to that.
Thank you. I'm passing it on to Councilmember Aviles.
Thank you so much, Chair, and thank you all for being here and the work that you do. I'm sorry if I'm asking a question that you may have already answered, but can you talk to me a little bit about what specific training happens for co-occurring learning disorders, particularly in the context of the dyslexia intervention? What kind of training are folks receiving for that?
Thank you. So the training looks like a number of different things. Most of the training that we're providing to teachers who work with students, for example, in our iRead program or who are working at any of our structured literacy sites is OG training, so Orton Gillingham through Edwards OG. We're also, many of them have Wilson training, and so we're really looking at teachers to have the skills to provide that kind of explicit instruction and to be able to also they're being trained on intensive interventions as well, so that they can administer intensive intervention support. And that's the interventionists that we have been trained. So we have over 100 interventionists that are part of the literacy team, and then we have over 900 interventionists that are part of the centrally funded special education interventionists, and they've all received training that is through the International Dyslexia Association. So they have not only intensive training that is recognized internationally, but nationally, but they also have consistency across the practices, and that's what's really important to us. Dr. Ahmed talked earlier about coherence, and we want to make sure that our practices are consistent across the board.
And it sounds like really large numbers, 100, 900, but of course we have a system of almost 1 million students. How many interventionists do you think we need to have in the system to fully be able to cover?
Every school should have an interventionist, absolutely. And depending on the population of a school, some schools even have more. But right now what we're doing is using those over 100 interventionists that are at the central level, plus the 960, to develop capacity from within. So part of what's happening is those interventionists are going into phase 1 schools that have demonstrated need. And the idea is those phase 1 schools should be identifying someone or identified someone who will be developed from within so that that is sustainable. That's what's most important. This can't be seen as an initiative that is temporary and only while the resources are there. This has to be a systemic change that includes building capacity from within. So we'll continue to do that. Last year, we also piloted intensive intervention across 80 schools, and so we continue to build, right? And I think that's part of it, is that we're growing those numbers. And then I mentioned a story earlier before you'd arrived that is actually an example of what's really exciting, right? A teacher who is a centrally funded interventionist trained on Spire was able to train 5 additional teachers at her school to use Spire. So now you have a cadre of 6 at one school because we had a teacher who was an expert. That's what we want to continue to do, is to build that capacity, and more folks are seeing themselves as part of that process.
Yeah, one of the things we've talked about in the past, in the context of the screenings around dyslexia, is multi-language learners and how the challenges that are presented, because they present differently, and those students are facing different challenges, so to speak. Is that also included in these trainings? Obviously, we have co-occurring. And then we have also speaking multiple languages.
Yes, and incredibly important for us. So there are 2 different ways that our English language learners experience school, and that may be in a bilingual program, which is either a transitional bilingual or dual language, or in one of our ENL classes. So in ENL classes, they'll receive instruction in English, and in our bilingual classes in their heritage language as well. So in those bilingual classes that are Spanish speaking, which is the majority of our programs, we are currently piloting both screeners that are available in Spanish and English, and we have schools that have selected, or districts that have selected as their Spanish language, Arriba la Lectura. And so they're able to use that. And for the foundational reading curriculum, they use Estrellita. And so they actually have access to materials in both Spanish and English, which other teachers have found incredibly helpful. So not just the teachers who are in the dual language or bilingual programs, but teachers across the content areas have found really helpful to have the materials or teachers across the programs, the materials in both Spanish and English, because then they can actually use the language to support their students who are in ENL classes as well. Not having to look for resources or not having to find translations, they already have access to those resources to support too. We know that our multilingual learners need explicit instruction in phonics. We know that they need vocabulary comprehension, and that's part of what's happening through this initiative anyway, and so they're receiving the support that they need.
Right, and Chair, if I may, just for a wrap-up question, actually 2 quick questions. Does the task force include multi-language, like does it include folks who speak Spanish or Mandarin or Arabic?
The Literacy Advisory Council?
Yes.
Yes,
Great.
and they're part of what we're looking at is in what ways are we supporting English language learners?
Fantastic. The last thing I just wanted to touch on was around speech-language pathology assistance. So it's obvious that we need additional speech-language professionals to service our communities and our children. Speech-language pathology assistance, in particular, we know exists in states like California, Florida, and Texas. And in fact, many low-income communities that are experiencing severe post-COVID shortage of speech-language intervention services. I'm curious, and I cannot understand why we have not utilized speech-language pathology assistants in New York to help us with dyslexia intervention initiative and the shortages that we're experiencing.
Yep, so we do have speech teachers, not the same thing, but we do have speech teachers as part of our related services, and those speech teachers have been trained as interventionists at
Right,
their
but there's
schools.
not enough of them.
Yep.
Do you think the city should be pursuing the use of speech-language pathologist assistants to expand the capacity to be able to meet this need?
Yes and no, right? So part of it is many of the students who receive speech services because of their needs in literacy. And much of what we're doing is through the intensive intervention supports that they're receiving through whether it's the centrally funded intervention teacher, the speech teacher, or some combination of those. We're able to provide them with the supports, the early and intensive intervention that they need to be able to move out of that as well. Right, that too. Part of this is needing to connect with the state to explore further.
Without question, but I guess what I'm getting at here is we have a capacity issue.
Yes.
Obviously, we are making a great effort to expand this, and this is a mechanism through which we could expand our capacity. And so what I would like to see is our city counterparts fully advocating for an expansion, particularly getting more assistants on board. So what I'm asking you directly is, will the New York City Department of Education vigorously advocate at the state level for assistants to be added?
We will explore, we'll connect with the state to explore further. It is important for us to be able to, we need whatever services are available for our students to be able to be successful in school. We understand that this initiative is a lever for change, and we need it to be as such. And so we'll connect with the state to continue.
Great, to be continued.
Yes.
Thank you.
Councilmember Menon?
Oh, great. Thank you so much, Chair. So I had a question about the literacy instruction. Back in 2016, I launched a program called NYC Kids Rise, which we launched in Queens and District 30. We piloted it with 13,000 children. It's a program that seeds every kindergartner with a college savings account. And one of the things that we were really focused on at the time was financial literacy and trying to embed in the curriculum financial literacy skills even at ages as young as kindergarten. So my question is, are you doing anything around that piece regarding literacy instruction?
Yes, great question. And I was at the event where we launched that, and it's really, really exciting that students have a foot in the door in terms of really being able to build out their long-term financial security in that way. Financial literacy is something that we are in the process of building as a standalone curriculum and also integrated K through 12. We want to make sure that it is not something that you only take as an elective in high school or that it is a unit as part of your econ in 12th grade, but instead that we are teaching kids from very early on what it means to be financially literate and financially savvy, and that we think about the different components of that. I'm glad that you bring that question up, though, because it's also an opportunity to talk about many literacies and just how important it is to absolutely focus on the teaching of reading, but to make sure that our students are data literate, financially literate, that they are digitally literate, right? And then we're focusing on all of those other pieces as well. So to your point earlier, Chair Joseph, this is incredibly important, and it is at the heart of everything that we do. And there's so much more that goes into this comprehensive piece.
Okay, that's great to hear. And NYC Kids Rise, as you know, we've got all sorts of resources.
Yes.
We're now in every school, so hopefully those resources are now being utilized in each school and each kindergarten class.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that.
Councilmember Rivera?
Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, to your whole team. You've mentioned that current reading results aren't anyone's fault, which I appreciated in your testimony. It's the result of a flawed approach, and that you're really trying to rectify that with some of the programming. I know I've spoken to some of my schools, the leadership and the parents, and they know that every school district is different. As you mentioned, every child learns differently. So with programs being implemented and set to launch, is the new standardization and enforcement for new curriculum really set to this timeline this year and next year? Are you going to really hold to that? Or are you going to adapt to different districts and their needs?
Do you want to talk about phase?
Yeah. We are looking at each individual district and their needs. The superintendent is really leading this work, and they know their districts best. And so they've been engaging with different stakeholders in their district to make the best decision for their district, for their schools. So yes, we are, and we're going to continue to monitor that and see how it goes. But as of right now, yes, we are.
Okay, I appreciate that. We have great superintendents in my district, so I look forward to working with them closely. Data was mentioned, and you said there might be some data that you cannot share. Can you tell us what data is being collected, and how are agencies communicating with teachers to understand the effectiveness of these new curriculums?
I'm actually just not sure what we can share publicly. We're just now collecting data, so I don't know whether or not. But we are collecting screener data. We're collecting data about intervention results, and then we're collecting a range of qualitative data as well. And whatever we can make available to the council, we absolutely will. We need this to be public and accessible, and where we can celebrate that we're making great progress, we want to, and where we know that there's room for growth, we absolutely want to be able to dig into that as well. So all of our teams are actually sitting behind us, and so we'll absolutely make sure that we take note of this, and what we can share, we will.
Okay. And so dyslexia screenings were mentioned. What initiatives are in place to address the needs of older students with dyslexia? So students who are in middle school and high school. And I would also like to know, how does dyslexia affect graduation rates? I guess alternatively, are students with dyslexia who are not given the proper individualized education plan graduating at a lower rate?
So I don't have that data as far as the graduation rates. I think that's a really interesting topic to dig into a little bit more. We know that necessarily dyslexia has an impact on a student's well-being as a whole, health and mental health, and their ability to engage in learning, right? You hear stories of folks who struggled throughout school. Many of our students who have dyslexia learn a range of strategies that they can use to progress through with difficulty and many, many long hours and a heavy cognitive load, but it'd be interesting to take a look at that specifically. As far as programming and training for secondary school, we, in January, are launching literacy hubs for middle school and high school that are going to be something like learning sites. We'll have intensive intervention supports. We'll have specific programming. The teachers will receive training in OG and other strategies. And we want to make sure that these are integrated into the school space. And so we already have schools that we've identified with the help of the Division of School Leadership, where they will get that kind of intensive support. And we will collect information, data from what works there, and also open up those sites for learning for other schools who want to take any of those practices and build them into their own schools as well. So that launches in January, and we have a range of training that we have already been offering to our secondary school teachers. We'll also launch modules in September for secondary to review the science of reading, and we'll continue to build the capacity because we know that there are many secondary students who still need to have their needs met, and we want to make sure that we're doing it within our school system.
Okay, well, thank you. I look forward to the partnership. I have a very interesting district, School District 1 and 2, very progressive schools as well that are proud of what they've been able to accomplish and achieve, and look forward to all of us at the table. So thank you to the chairs for the time, and thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. This one is gonna be dedicated to Councilmember Rivera. In November of 2022, in an op-ed published in the Village Sun, Mayor Adams announced for the first time we'll be testing everyone who comes to Rikers Island for dyslexia and providing support to those who need it. However, nearly a year later, the administration testified at City Council hearing that they missed the targeted start date in September to screen incarcerated individuals at Rikers Island for dyslexia. Has dyslexia testing at Rikers Island begun?
Thank you. So we are training leads at each of the schools at East River Academy and at Passages on administering dyslexia screeners. So those are 8 staff members who are being trained. Dyslexia screeners, it's a pilot. So we're administering screeners to adults ages 18 to 21 at East River Academy and students at Passages. In the event that a student is screened and identified to have traits of dyslexia that would require additional assessment, we've organized instructional programming to provide that and to make sure that they get access to that. We already have trained some of the teachers, and some of those teachers in D79 have been trained in Orton Gillingham and are already providing training on Wilson and rewards, another intervention that I think you're familiar with. So all structured literacy programs to help students who struggle with reading. But it's important for us because these are students who are also part of our system, young people, and we can change their life opportunities.
So have we begun?
We've started the training, yes.
How about test screening the incarcerated
I
individuals
don't
at
think we've
Rikers?
started screening yet.
And what's the timeline to start?
January. Thank you.
January. I'm
Yes.
sure
Sorry, had to
Councilmember
just make
Rivera
sure.
will appreciate that. Any follow-up, Councilmember? For the dyslexia on East River Academy.
That was my question, whether testing had actually started, but I see you're on your way.
Yes.
Okay, well, we'll certainly follow up.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, administration. We'll send over some questions. We'll send over some questions for you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You look surprised. Was this a little too short? We could stay and add on a couple of more hours.
I
We
did
got
look
you.
surprised. I brought snacks just in case.
We are always happy to be here. So thank you.
On behalf of my colleagues, just thank you. This matters incredibly. It's something that New York City has taken on in a really big way, and as you mentioned, it's a national effort. And anything that we can do to help others learn, as we have learned from other states and cities, I think is incredibly important. And this also helps ensure that our public has information that they may not have had before. So thank you for this opportunity.
And thank you for the critical role you play in all of this. We really do appreciate it.
You're very welcome. As you mentioned, 2-year-olds only get to be
That's
2-year-olds one time. So if we build a strong foundation, you'll have a strong top. So the early childhood is very important.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much to the administration. We will now turn to public testimony. We will be limiting public testimony today to 3 minutes each. For in-person panelists, please come up to the table once your name has been called. For virtual panelists, once your name is called, a member of the staff will unmute you and the Sergeant at Arms will set the timer and give you the go-ahead to begin. Please wait for the Sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. Our first panelist will be virtual, and then we will hear from in-person panelists. Barbara Foreman on Zoom, you may begin your testimony.
So I'm gonna.
Okay. Thank you. I hope you can hear me. It's wonderful to be zooming into this meeting. I really thought that the New York City Public Schools staff did an outstanding job, and it's like you've confirmed my whole 40 years of work in the United States on helping kids learn to read. So if you don't know me, I'm, how to describe it? I've been involved in learning to read because of my undergraduate interest in Japanese, doing cross-linguistic work. My first academic appointment was in Texas, where I worked with bilingual programs across the state, and then spent a year in Washington, D.C. as the first commissioner of the grant program at the IES, Institute for Education Sciences. Then went to Florida, where I was a distinguished professor, director of Florida Center for Reading Research, and then the director of the Regional Educational Lab Southeast. And as the REL Southeast was intimately involved in the Mississippi Miracle, we did the evaluation, which showed that gains in teacher knowledge on letters was actually showed up in the classroom with an observation tool that I developed. It's in the appendix. So all of these REL materials are free for you to use. Those observations of letters implementation and high student engagement were associated with student progress in grades K to 2 on reading, and then you have the NAEP significant gains in subsequent years. Carrie Wright, partnering was brought in by the Barksdale Reading Institute, a private foundation, which I worked with. The State Board of Education, the legislature, everything was aligned to make this a long-term reading success program. You are correct, Mississippi's tiny compared to New York City, but there are some key things that are important about how it worked, and that is you really need to have an evaluation. You need to videotape your high implementers and use them to mentor teachers. It sounds like maybe you're going to be doing that by creating these model classrooms. You need to have a fidelity observation checklist that's aligned with the HMH curriculum. It's not punitive, it's just good feedback for who's ever observing the teacher to talk about what might be done differently. So if HMH hasn't developed that, they should do that for you. You need to get HMH to be clear about what assessments. They have a whole page of assessments.
Sorry,
listed
Dr.
in
Foreman?
there. Yes.
Sorry, since your time came up, I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Okay, sure.
My apologies for the interruption. I have
No,
a question.
that's fine.
If the science of reading is so well established and something we've known about for so long, why are we still debating it?
Yes. I submitted my testimony to you about this. It's an issue of differing truth systems, epistemologies, seem to lie at the heart of the debate. For example, you could imagine a group of people, we'll call them Group A, typically prioritizes deductive methods that embed hypothesis testing, precise operationalization of constructs, and efforts to decouple the researchers' beliefs from their own interpretation and generalization of empirical evidence. Then imagine another group, we'll call it Group B, prioritizes inductive methods such as phenomenological, ethnographic, and grounded theory approaches that embed focus on the meaning and understanding that comes through a person's lived experience, and relies on the researcher's own observations to shape meaning and principles. So Group A says, look at the mountain of evidence. How can you believe it? How can you not believe it? Whereas Group B says, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't match up with our experiences. Why should we value your knowledge above our own? This really lies at the basis of the disagreements in the great debate on reading.
And
whether you believe in evidence and the scientific method or not.
And what does the science of reading say about how children learn to read?
Yeah, so in my testimony, I gave you just one paragraph because it could go on for, I also gave you a book chapter on the topic. But basically, the basic key points on how children learn to read and then what we know about instructional practices that promote reading are that these are learned activities and they reside on a foundation of linguistic skills that are supportive. So we decode from written letters to oral or silent language to comprehend word meaning. We encode from spoken language to letters to express meaning. And through explicit instruction, explicit and systematic. Systematic means the scope and sequence of these sound letter patterns needs to be clear, and the assessment needs to be aligned to that scope and sequence. So these, the instruction and the decoding and encoding of words is what we call the alphabetic principle. So English speakers have an alphabet, most European languages do. I've worked in Florida, of course, with Haitian Creole. They're Creole versions, they're different orthographies, but mostly we're talking here today about English and Spanish and other alphabetic languages. And so these letters and sounds relate intentionally and conventionally in a written language, in the orthography. That's the written language. So in English, this orthographic mapping extends beyond the letter sound patterns to include learning frequent irregular words like of, said, morphemic elements like inflectional endings, plurals, affixes, and reliable syllable patterns like closed syllables such as the word insect. So mastering the depth and the structure of English orthography is essential if students are to recognize words accurately and efficiently, thereby freeing cognitive resources to activate the linguistic devices and the world knowledge critical for making text cohesive and therefore comprehensible. So I list a lot of references in my testimony.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Foreman. We really appreciate it. We have your testimony. We'll make sure to review it. And again, we really appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, good luck.
Appreciate you so much.
Our first in-person panel will be Honorable Joanne Simon and Mary Picaro. Please make your way to the front desk.
I gave it to Jim. How are you, Mary? How are you? I haven't seen her. I know. I am going to need water, though.
Joanne Simon, you may begin your testimony.
Oh, I go first. Okay.
Can I just say a special welcome to the Assemblywoman, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. Thank you. It's an honor.
My fellow educator.
Yeah, right. So I will attempt to be as brief as I can. You know, that's hard for me, but especially about this topic. So those of you who've had to listen to me talk about it in the past, you know. Chair Joseph, Chair Abreu, I really want to thank you for this opportunity to testify today about the science of reading, the curriculum that effort that the city is doing, and the issue of dyslexia screening. And I will tell you that my first reaction to the news was hallelujah, because we have needed to do this for so very long. And this approach that the city is taking will not be smooth. We have a big system, right? But it is so incredibly critical. And you know, these changes are needed because our city and our state have not been teaching enough of our students to read accurately and fluently. Too many of our educators have been taught about reading, but not enough about how to teach it. And where they have been taught about teaching, they haven't been taught in a way that aligns with the brain science, because the brain is how we process written language. So as many of you may know, I'm a former teacher of the deaf, and the biggest challenge for prelingually deaf children is reading and language, right? And for deaf children of deaf parents, they often have much better language. Why? Because they have language right from the beginning. So it is language. So all of the testimony you heard previously about bathing your children in words and in language, and let's make a list, let's go to the store, we're writing it down. All of that is stuff you really need to do. And the more language, the more we are able to bathe our children in language, the more they will learn that language. But then we have to translate that to the written form, right? And so, you know, language, as you know, is based in the brain. And so, you know, I come to this proposition with a lot of background in language and cognition, which I think has been one of the issues that hasn't been something we've addressed really when it comes to teacher education. I'm also a former board member and president of the New York branch of the International Dyslexia Association, which is now called Everyone Reading. We have an annual conference every year that really draws from the region, and we, in fact, I still say we, it's been 10 years since I left, train a lot of New York City school teachers. You know, just another point, again, just in terms of context, you know, I've been a disability civil rights attorney for 3 decades, and I tried the seminal case on dyslexia and access to standardized tests. and did take us to the Supreme Court. We won, by the way. So, but you know what you find when you do that is that people aren't paying attention necessarily. So let me just say that I passed a bill on dyslexia that requires that you're allowed to use dyslexia in an IEP or an IEP eligibility documents. Parents have been told for 45 years that's not allowed. That is not true. Governor Cuomo signed that bill in 2007, and the two takeaways from the stakeholder group that we did that was part of the mandate from the bill was that early screening was needed and teacher training. So we need to prime the pump in higher education, make sure our teachers enter our schools knowing something about how to teach reading in a way that the brain processes reading. This goes back to why Johnny can't read. I'm not going to go into great detail, but one of the things that I will just sort of cut to the chase a bit is that New York has started an initiative called the Path Forward, right? We're doing it in connection with the Hunt Institute and Illiteracy Academy Collective. And what is so critical about this, because I have a bill for 3 credits of science or reading for our teachers. I have a bill to screen in the state prisons. I've passed it in the Assembly several times, but it has not yet passed the Senate. And I have a universal screening bill. But the reality is, what you want to do is make sure that everybody's on the same page. And the effort for the Path Forward is really all of the institutions that matter for changing the picture in New York are working together. The Regents, State Education Department, SUNY, CUNY, independent colleges and universities, the governor's office, the legislature. I'm the legislature's designee to the steering committee. And it is so important that the state of New York is saying our kids are worth it. Our kids need to learn how to read, and we are going to ensure that we actually teach them. And we will change all of those things that have been happening in our state that are not working and change them into things that are working. And we have everybody at the table working together in partnership to make sure that happens. So that dovetails very nicely. The city is also at the table with this. It is the largest school district in the state, but they are on the right track. And I just want to just say again how happy I am to be here, and I'm certainly happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you, and I appreciate that I've gone over the 3 minutes, but that happens.
So when I visit Albany, I can go over the 3 minutes.
Are you ready? Good afternoon, everyone. I think you know me, Mary Vaccaro, Vice President of Education for the UFT and Executive Director of the Teacher Center. And thank you for having me on behalf of 190,000 members. Learning is fundamental. One of the basic premises is understanding how to read, being able to comprehend what you're reading, and being fluent in your reading. I'm not going to go through all that I had for you, all of the things that were already said. But to make sure this important effort succeeds, it's essential that the DOE provide educators with appropriate and ongoing professional development opportunities to not only support them this year, but next year as well. Michael Mulgrew has been going over this as the initiative was launched, and he has spoke seriously about the need to drive instruction and training for classroom teachers. At the union's urging, the UFT Teacher Center is playing an integral role in the training to make sure teachers get the support they need adapted to the students they teach. To kick things off, the UFT Teacher Center designed and offered courses this summer, as you heard about in the earlier testimony, down in Shanker Hall at the UFT. The title of the course, as our Assemblywoman would tell you, is Reading for All, the Science of Reading Across All the Curriculum Areas, because that's vital. The course had hundreds of participants that came for both in-person and virtual, and I know, Chair Joseph, you came to visit us there. Participants also found out about digital resources, learning strategies to address their social emotional needs of all of the students in the classroom within the context of reading, and received guidance on how to use these curricula with diverse groups of learners, MLL learners, SWD learners as well. We found that teachers are engaged, energetic, and open to changing their classroom practices in response to high-quality professional learning. If they understand why they're in that learning, that will translate right into the classroom. We had a teacher that I want to quote here, Michelle Grant, a teacher from PS 280 in Jackson Heights, who said the training gave her a toolkit and resources she could use to help her English language learners. And she told us after the first session, at first I felt overwhelmed, but now I'm starting to feel more confident and at ease about how I can support my students in the 23-24 school year. As the rollout of each of these programs moves forward, the DOE must ensure that all educators using the new curricula have the help they need to make a successful transition into this curricula. The UFT Teacher Center is committed to doing everything it can do to support them. We have 15 new Teacher Center district coaches who will provide regular assistance around the literacy work to educators in the 15 community school districts. And I know before you questioned about District 75, we have one coach there that's supporting them as well. The Teacher Center, I'll finish the sentence, the Teacher Center will work hard and offer literacy workshops and office hours throughout the year. So I think that's key to you knowing these office hours have been integral to the work that we're doing. Teachers are getting online with our Teacher Center coaches between 4 and 8 o'clock at night on their own time, getting the support that they need. And you have my testimony up there.
Thank you to you both. Assembly member, I have a question. Bill S7003 is currently a bill in the committee at the state level. While the bill would require all school districts to screen all students for dyslexia and dysgraphia, it also gives parents and guardians the right to have their children opt out of these screenings. Though parents and guardians have the right to make decisions on their child's education, some may have belief surrounding stigmas associated with learning disabilities and therefore may choose to opt out and fear that should their child be diagnosed with a learning disability, they may be treated differently, bullied, or put in a different class. Given this background, should the opt-out portion remain even with the risks it would negatively impact a child's educational path?
You know, I'm just looking up the bill. It's easier for me if I have the assembly number, no offense. So it's Brad's, okay. So let's see, yeah. So here's the challenge is that, you know, there is very strong parent choice movement. And of course, parents ultimately have the decision to make about their children's education. You know, one of the early Supreme Court cases was around whether a parent had a right, because somebody was teaching German, like 1920s kind of thing, right? And the parents didn't want that, and whether or not a child had a fundamental right to an education. And in fact, that right is inchoate under the law. So it's really the parents' rights until a child reaches the age of majority. So I think that is probably a provision that might be constitutionally required. I'm not as familiar with that bill. It's not a bill that I'm carrying in the Assembly. I think I'm on the bill in the Assembly. But so I think one of the issues is that when it comes to how you educate your children, there are certain things that we can't mandate. And of course, mandates these days are not very popular in many respects for a whole host of reasons, whether the mandate is in fact a good one or not. So I can't really speak to that more than that. It's not my bill, so I don't really know what the Senator Hoylman, what his thinking was in that. But I do think that one of the ways that we will get around some of these issues is if we help parents, if we educate parents, if we educate our teachers, if we provide that at-the-elbow support. Once they've had some training, a weekend of Wilson is not enough. We need to empower our parents, and we need to find lots of different ways that we can help students, whether it's in school or out of school. So a lot of after-school programs. We can actually embed the science of reading in a lot of after-school programs. In the Teach for America is now getting interested in science of reading. That's really important. And so parents will start understanding this stuff better and addressing this in a more constructive way once they understand it better. And let's face it, we know a lot of the parents in our school system were themselves not given a very good education by the New York City public schools or other schools, right? The prevailing method of, Dick and Jane was word memorization. The whole language actually isn't very good. It doesn't teach you how to break down a word or to address words that are new to you. It's only what you've memorized, right? Now, roughly, according to results, roughly 35% of our kids are going to learn to read no matter what you do to them. And unfortunately, we've been training teachers to teach the 35%. We need to really look at the 65% that we haven't been addressing. And I think that there are lots of ways that we can embed that, and lots of ways that I know we will be coming forward with a state action plan by June that I am sure will address a lot of those issues with regard to supports, professional development, staff development. The people who teach our folks who are incarcerated, they're not with the UFT, they're with another union, right? So I've been working with them on our bill in the state, for state prisons, for example. So we can address those issues in a variety of ways. One of the challenges at the state level is legislation, because whatever smacks of curriculum is, depending on your interpretation of the state constitution, something you really can't do. And that's part of the reason why I think this Path Forward idea will be successful, is because it is a partnership. Nobody's blaming anybody, nobody's pointing fingers. What we want to do is take this ball and run with it and change the way, and we will change our kids' futures if we teach them to read.
Absolutely. Earlier, I'm not sure if you were here, and that was one of the questions I asked the Chancellor. What is the partnership with the universities? Because they're creating the pipelines that's providing our teachers. So he did say that he met with CUNY and SUNY and other higher ed institutions to make sure the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things is we know that, for example, there was a report issued last year actually June 2023, that really pointed to the fact that, we have 5 pillars of reading according to the National Reading Panel. And 25% of our schools were teaching any of the pillars. 25% weren't teaching any at all. Some were teaching a pillar here, a pillar there, the cart before the horse pillar, that sort of thing. But, we need to progress. We need it to be systematic. We need to be direct instruction. We need it to be explicit instruction. For years we were doing discovery stuff, like the new math. Really didn't teach anybody anything. If you weren't wired for math, you didn't learn anything. That's me. But we need explicit instruction. And we've learned over time that, in fact, children need explicit instruction. And so most of our children need that. Kids who are dyslexic need much more intensity and much more direct instruction on a more intensive basis, more specific interventions for particular areas that they have difficulty in. But the reality is 65% of our kids are not dyslexic, right? We know that. But we're missing the boat with an awful lot of our kids. We can stop missing that boat. We want them all on the boat.
I second that. I want all of them on the boat as well. Sure. UFT, one of the questions I know I get a lot is, how are we leveraging also our paraprofessionals that are in the classroom that work one-on-one with these students on a daily basis? Are they included in this conversation as well?
So they are included in the conversation. They're part of all of the training that we give through the Teacher Center. The Teacher Center does, even though we call it the Teacher Center, it probably should have renamed at some point, because it's all educators that are in the school. So we have social workers coming to the workshops. We have school psychologists. We even have secretaries showing up at our workshops. So everyone that's in the school is coming. Paraprofessionals in particular, some of the focus we have done with them is more than on the reading, on the math, on the new algebra 9th grade curriculum. We have been having our paraprofessionals, because it's a different style of teaching math, getting support on the actual math itself. So we've been doing a lot of that work after school hours, and I'm happy to say full classes, all coming, so that's been great.
Thank you. Chair Abreu?
Thank you, Chair. Assemblywoman, I'm really excited to see everything you're doing in Albany. Curious to know, what's the appetite, among your colleagues to get this done? And I specifically asked the administration earlier about the Dyslexia Education Act. Can you speak to A7101? It's a bill that would establish statewide standards for screening of students in grades kindergarten through 5 for dyslexia. for the interventions required for students with dyslexia.
What's the number again?
7101.
Okay, so that's Assemblymember Carroll's bill. One of the things you'll notice is that a bunch of us have bills that are very similar, right? So I have a similar bill. He has similar bills. Senator Jackson and I have other bills. So I think that there's support there for sure, right? We have passed bills in the Assembly. When I passed the dyslexia bill in 2017, we had almost unanimous support for that bill. We passed a dyslexia task force bill a couple of times. It was unanimous, if not maybe missing one person. The challenge really has been, is it funded? Right, that's an issue. And so the governor has vetoed a number of things that were task forces, commissions, et cetera, because there's no money there. So it costs money to run a good task force. It costs money to run a commission. So that's a challenge. The other thing I think, is right now, I think the state's focus is on the collaborative effort right now, which is new, right? We launched in October. But there's a tremendous amount of support. When I started Dyslexia Awareness Day in 2016, we had a few people who came. We had young people come up. That's been growing every year. Every year for the last 5 or 6 years, the commissioner has attended. She attended when she was chancellor. She attends as commissioner. We have parents. We have kids come up. We have kids speak about their issues. We've had variety. We always have a panel of consumers, usually adults and one teenager, who themselves have dyslexia. We have had legislators with dyslexia. We have had former legislators with dyslexia, principals, kids who are just applying to college, et cetera. So each year we have more and more people supporting that. Each year we have more and more legislators who want to come and address the group and talk to the kids. And so there's a tremendous amount of support for doing this work. The challenge has been legislatively or doing it another way. State Ed does know that they need to make these changes. They've known it since we did this dyslexia stakeholder group. The challenge has been how to go about doing that. And that's why I have so much confidence in the initiative that we're embarking on now.
Thank you so much, Assemblywoman. Really excited for your work here, and thank you so much for leading on this.
I'm very excited. I've been waiting for this for a very long time.
Thank you so much to both panelists. Our next panel, Sarah Part, Debbie Mayer, Callie Higgins, Lizana Tunica, and Teresa Ranian. Please make your way to the front table.
Thank you.
I've rewritten mine, so my copies are inspected.
I'm sitting.
Sarah Part, you may begin your testimony.
Thank you for the opportunity to testify. My name is Sarah Part, and I am the Senior Policy Analyst at Advocates for Children of New York. For more than 50 years, Advocates for Children has worked to ensure a high-quality education for New York students who face barriers to academic success, focusing on students from low-income backgrounds. Every year, we help thousands of families navigate the school system, including many families whose children are struggling with reading. We routinely work with middle and high school, not because they lack the motivation or the cognitive capacity to learn to read, but because the public schools fail to provide evidence-based instruction and intervention. To institute guardrails around English language arts curricula. There's an enormous body of research on how children learn to read, but leaving the choice of curriculum up to individual schools resulted in tremendous inconsistency and widespread use of programs grounded in discredited theories of reading development rather than in the scientific evidence. At AFC, we've seen the consequences. Students who are unable to read menus and job applications, let alone their academic textbooks, whose self-esteem and mental health suffers, and whose understandable frustrations with reading manifest in disruptive behavior and disengagement from school. That's why we're supportive of the effort New York City Public Schools is making to shift away from balanced literacy and towards curricula that align with the science of reading. By improving core instruction, we can prevent many reading difficulties before they occur. But there will always be some students who need extra support, and so New York City also needs a robust literacy safety net that identifies such students and matches them with intensive intervention. While universal screening is one component of such a safety net, it should be a means to an end, not an end in itself. The point of identifying students who are struggling with reading or who have language-based learning disabilities like dyslexia is to ensure that those students receive the targeted help they need to become strong readers. New York City Public Schools must ensure that all schools have the training, the personnel, and the infrastructure necessary to use screening data to inform instruction and to provide timely, evidence-based small group or one-on-one intervention to all students who need it. Finally, we'd just like to emphasize that shifting what happens in thousands of individual classrooms on a day-to-day basis is going to take time. There are no silver bullets in public education, and when it comes to the science of reading, New York City is just getting started. We want to ensure that current budgetary pressures and the understandable desire to see results quickly do not lead to policymakers abandoning the current effort before it even has a chance to succeed. We urge the Council to remain steadfast in the commitment to ensuring that all schools are using reading curricula with proven effectiveness and to push the school system to provide all students, including those who have disabilities like dyslexia, with the intervention and support they need. Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. Debbie Mayer.
Thank you very much. Is that better?
Yep.
So thank you very much. I was here in 2016 testifying to Councilmember Drom. I testified in front of Councilmember Mark Traeger. So today is exciting. We've really come a long way. So again, my name is Debbie Meyer. I consult for the Dyslexia Alliance for Black Children. I serve on the Literacy Advisory Council for New York City Public Schools. And I consult on the Dyslexia and Literacy program at the Ralph Bunche PS 125 school. But most importantly, I'm the mother and wife of dyslexic people. I've rewritten my testimony as I've listened today, and I want to talk about the importance of a true diagnosis. I wanted to talk to Councilmember Abreu about state and federal issues, but I'll just say that for the record. And if there's time, I'll tell you about what's happening at PS 125. So the importance of a true diagnosis. Dyslexia is a lifelong issue. It doesn't end in high school. It doesn't end when you learn to read. We need a true diagnosis. And kids need to learn how to advocate for themselves during their middle school and high school so they can do so at college. Dyslexia and a true diagnosis will also protect you at a career. If you have a career shelving stock and something happens and you're asked to write a memo and you can't, your dyslexia diagnosis will protect you. You can't get fired for that. So we need our dyslexic kids to be identified past screening, but with true diagnoses that they can carry on through their whole lives. My son uses his in college. His disability advisor talked to him 3 times before he started with his college career. It was absolutely amazing. He also has a lifelong pass to all national parks and all federal lands. He can camp on any federal land for free because he has a disability. So we really need to identify these kids and make sure they have all the tools they need to succeed. For teaching colleges, could this committee do a joint hearing with the Committee on Higher Education and support what the DOE is doing and bug the colleges more? I'd be happy to testify there as well. The biggest state issue I think we really need to get to, and you could help with, is teacher licensing. And the Hunt Institute program is trying to get to that, but we need to get there quicker because that's what will make teaching colleges respond. Federal issues. There is a bill, it may not go anywhere, but Senator Cassidy really wants to put dyslexia higher in the IDEA. And that would be great if he had a reasonable definition of dyslexia. But he's using a really outdated definition from 1896. And we know what the country was like in 1896. Sarah Carr just wrote a long article about it. So finally, PS 125. Do you want to hear about it? Okay. So if you had gone there in May of 2022, you would have seen kids rolling around in the hallway and the paras frustrated. You would have seen kids on the floor, paras frustrated. But when we asked PS 125 if they wanted to do this, Principal Leopold got her community on board. So September 2023, the teachers dismantled their Fontes and Pinnell classrooms and created content libraries. Some of them did this with their children and had their children resort the books. They removed the word walls from their, replaced them with sound walls. They added decodable readers to the phonics program that they're using. They have geodes and foundations. And then from late November to February, K-3 teachers, interventionists, and SLPs participated together in 30 to 60 hours of Orton Gillingham training. So they had a common language and a common training. And they're using this to implement foundations well. So if you walk through in 2023, it's a totally different picture. Every student was engaged. The paraprofessionals were bored. They need something else to do because these kids were just totally engaged. The teachers were incredibly energized. And so year over year, I looked at some of the statistics. So at the end of 2022, less than half of the kindergartners were at grade level. After just a few months of good phonics instruction and good engagement, 60% of the same exact kids were at or above grade level. First graders in 2022, barely 1/3 of them were reading, but 2/3 by the time they finished second grade. So they really started flipping this around with only a few months of training. It started mid-year. The good engagement just started thereafter, but they are also using inquiry-based knowledge building for all their social studies and science in the classroom, and that's really good too. And to understand that you can have a progressive approach for content and a direct approach for reading and writing and direction giving and math really works in this school. So they invite any teacher and any of you to come see what's happening in the school, and I really think you should. So thank you. I have Christmas gifts or Hanukkah gifts or December gifts for everybody too. But I can't walk up there, so we'll get them to you.
Thank you so much. Callie Higgins?
Chairs, council members, and staff, thank you for this opportunity to speak. My name is Callie Higgins, and I am a legal fellow at the New York Legal Assistance Group, or NYLAG. For more than 20 years, NYLAG's Special Education Unit has advocated on behalf of low-income children with disabilities. I appreciate the opportunity to offer the following comments, and I have also provided detailed written testimony. My fellowship at NYLAG focuses on ensuring that students with dyslexia have access to evidence-based reading interventions. The transition by New York City Public Schools towards a phonics-based reading curriculum in elementary schools is an important step that acknowledges the growing consensus around the science of reading. Yet, there is an important gap between the literacy instruction the next generation of New York City Public School students will receive and the instruction current middle and high school students received as younger students. Our clients with dyslexia at NYLAG reflect this reality. They are intelligent middle and high school students who are not given the tools to learn to read as elementary school students, and this lack of evidence-based reading instruction harms them to this day. Additionally, our older clients frequently do not have evidence-based reading services recommended on their IEPs because IEP teams know these services are unlikely to be available in a middle or high school setting. Not only is this a clear violation of federal law, it is also a deprivation of the only service scientifically proven to benefit students with dyslexia. We know that dyslexia develops equally across all races and genders, but access to meaningful reading interventions in New York City is not equal across demographics. Our clients are low income and overwhelmingly students of color, and we see them receive disproportionate access to evidence-based reading approaches. They are less likely to be accurately diagnosed with dyslexia and have worse reading outcomes than their white peers. For example, my fellowship focuses on serving the communities of East New York and Brownsville. These two communities serve predominantly Black and Hispanic students, and only 10% of their special education population is reading proficiently. Access to evidence-based reading approaches is not just a disability rights issue, it is also a racial justice issue. We ask that as you continue to invest in evidence-based literacy policies, you consider the needs of older students in historically underserved communities. This can be done by requiring every middle and high school to have access to reading specialists, by including a section on IEPs to target the historic lack of phonics instruction, and by investing in more schools like the South Bronx Literacy Academy that exclusively serves students with dyslexia. We thank the committees on state and federal legislation and education for the work they have done in supporting evidence-based phonics instruction and for holding this hearing. We hope NYLAC can be a resource for you going forward.
Thank you for your testimony. Lizana Tunica.
Good afternoon. My name is Lasana Tunica L., and I'm the Senior Deputy Director at Educators for Excellence, New York. Educators for Excellence is a nonprofit organization that's committed to building teacher power to ensure that teachers have direct input into the policies that impact their classrooms. And our mission is to raise the prestige of the teaching profession. It's almost been a year ago that over 100 of our members met with Chancellor Banks and Deputy Chancellor Quintana and presented them with a set of recommendations around ensuring that there was a streamlined set of high-quality curriculum options for New York City public schools that were culturally relevant, and that there was embedded PD aligned throughout the year to implement said curriculums. So as you can imagine, we were ecstatic when NYC Reads was rolled out, and upon the implementation, we immediately began mechanisms to continuously have that feedback loop from educators so that NYCPS will be informed through our network what educators were saying on the ground. We facilitated 4 different town halls starting in the summer and most recently about a week ago. 2 of those included phase 1 and phase 2 educators who shared their experiences, who had experience in the 3 curriculums, as well as vendors, experts, PL practitioners also presented, and there were Q&A sessions from that. We also facilitated and partnered with 2 districts' superintendents as part of their gaining feedback from teachers to get feedback in what curriculums they would like to see. So those were awesome sessions, and comparably speaking, I guess we spoke to over 500 teachers in those 4 town halls. We also put out surveys that they shared some of their feedback. There was glows and grows expressed around the different curriculums. It was billed as straight talk. We also had teachers from various parts of the country who was well versed in the 3 curriculum, Baltimore, Oakland, that share with New York City teachers their experiences in implementing these curriculums as well. And from our survey results, we'll find that teachers' concern is that they receive the PL throughout the year. That's common, that's what we hear constantly and repetitively is the PL, as well as the tailoring to unique student populations through the curriculum as well. And they would like to see those models of real in-classroom teaching and implementation of these curriculums. And we've also collected about 300 or so petitions around this PL, so that's the major piece of this thing that we will continue to contribute to, as well as sharing the feedback from our educators and continue to partner effectively with New York City Public Schools to make sure that this thing is rolled out successfully. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Teresa Ranian.
Hi, I'm Teresa Ranieri. Thank you for having me. I've had the privilege of being an educator in District 9, located in the Bronx, for 27 years. I'm also a member of E4E. I was a kindergarten, first, and second grade teacher for the majority of my career. As a classroom teacher, I was considered highly effective, so much so that I was asked to be a literacy coach in a teacher's college reading and writing project school. using the premise that 15 to 20% of students in a classroom are impacted by dyslexia. I am personally responsible for approximately 55 students not learning how to read while in my classroom. As a project school literacy coach, I contributed to approximately 525 students not receiving the instruction needed. My students that I loved fiercely had undefined learning differences, were being taught by an untrained teacher, using curriculum and assessments that were unproven and at times harmful. And as they grew, they had a greater chance for decreased school engagement and a much more likely chance not to finish school. I contributed to the school-to-prison pipeline and partially responsible for the inequities for our Black and brown students that are disproportionately impacted by the negative effects of dyslexia. Knowing there was something wrong, I began my own journey to learn more, and once I knew better, I wanted to right my wrongs. Fortunately, in 2017, I was hired as a universal literacy coach under Andrew Fletcher. I was placed at the family school in District 9. The principal, Ms. Penn, a math guru, was willing to listen and learn and invested in developing teacher content knowledge. Before it was common or trendy, we discontinued those unproven, ineffective curriculum and assessments. Teachers were trained in Orton Gillingham, letters, and the writing revolution, and have learned to provide research-based instruction. What we still do not have is a dyslexia screener. While children at the family school make significant progress based on Acadience and had the highest growth in the district as measured by MAP Reading Growth Assessment, we still have students' needs not being met due to unidentified dyslexia. Yet, less than 10 miles from our school, Mayor Adams has stated there's an estimated 30 to 40% of inmates at Rikers have dyslexia. For years, rather than invest in a dyslexia screener and provide needed instruction, more money is spent on special education services and incarceration. How did that make any sense? I look forward to a change, and I hope budget cuts do not interfere. That's where y'all come in. Thank you so much for New York City Reads, a Tier 1 curriculum. Again, the family school has been very successful. This is our third year because teachers became knowledgeable on children, how children learn to build knowledge, read, and write. As a school-based literacy coach supporting schools, we use Edwards OG letters, the Writing Revolution, Learning Ally, the Reading League, and Achieve the Core that's aligned. This is my huge concern. There are schools, not phase one, that are still today, and I saw it last week, using consultants with DOE contracts that are still encouraging running records, level text. I saw on Friday a kindergarten classroom where they had to read, I have a grandfather, and she said, I have a grandpa, and the teacher accepted it because these consultants aren't as trained as the people you heard speak earlier. I am a volunteer with HMH Into Reading, so I provide in the evening support, live video calls, Facebook Live for those teachers, so I hear. The second concern is Teach Hub. The youngest students cannot access these wonderful curriculum resources through Clever. Kindergartners are expected to go to a website, type in an email, and type in a password. So they don't have the resources that we spent all the money for. And also, we can't link it to our Google Classroom. This is not the chancellor, but DIIT does not want to hear from me anymore. I've done all I can. So as you're having these conversations, especially in budget cuts, why do we have consultants that are ineffective? And why aren't we using all the resources that we've paid for? On behalf of my children, thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm so happy Deputy Chancellor Cantana's here so she can hear. Huh? She's taking notes to bring it back to leadership, so you never have to sit here and say you were part of the problem. Next time I see you, you were part of the solution.
I'm very happy to say we are now 4th in District 9. We went from under 20% reading proficiently to 4th in the district. It's a tale of two schools. We're one building with two schools. If you make a right and come to our school, you have a 60% chance of learning to read. If you make a left, you have less than a 20% chance.
We need to change the two tales of the city in the same building. Access and equity has always been one of my things. Thank you. Wanted to ask you real quick. You also talked about Teacher Hub, You also talked about Teacher Hub.
Teach Hub?
Teach Hub. It is very hard to navigate. Is there a plan to do it? Is there a plan to make that website a little bit more user friendly? Because if you're not tech savvy, some of our parents are not, and we know that. I've always talked about that. How can we make it user friendly for our parents to be able to access it?
So Teach Hub won't give parents access.
So the rest of the country, kindergartners access with a QR code through something like Clever.
Right. I have Clever because I have a public school kid too.
Exploring other options for how to get our resources available, especially through the AI policy lab, but we can talk more.
You heard it here. I'm happy you're here to hear it. So what were your experiences with the teachers? Are they on board with this program, and what areas of improvement would they like to see?
Yes, they're definitely on board. Again, there's anxiety about the PL, whether or not they receive it all year. But we were very superintendents were engaging their districts around having input of what during the selection process. And some of the things that teachers were doing was very exciting and tailoring and scaffolding to their unique populations, using various creative ways. I remember one anecdote around bridging kids from where they are to teach Greek mythology and using a book with a character that they would recognize, but using that to bridge them toward learning about this Greek mythology. So that was great enthusiasm. There was a lot of creativity and tailoring that we saw. That was pretty exciting.
I have one question for Sarah Part. Who spoke about PS 125? Apologies. What's your name?
Debbie Meyer.
Debbie. PS 125 is in my district. Can you please talk about the program that's taking place there, its success, and how it's working?
Sure. Sure, thank you. So, I'm not sure if you heard everything before, but we got first family and SLT and PA buy-in to it. I think that was really important. The second was a commitment to remain steeped in social justice and progressive education in content, but direct instruction where you needed direct explicit instruction in reading and in math and in writing and things like that. So last November, Orton-Gillingham instruction began, and it went through February, and we did an alignment, a horizontal alignment. So it was teachers, interventionists, and the SLPs all speaking the same language, all having the same training. They could talk to each other about it. And so when you walk through, you used to walk through and see kids hyperactive, which with a small H type of hyperactive, just frustrated, rolling around on the floor. And now when you walk through, everyone's engaged. The kids, the ICT kindergarten class, you couldn't tell who was a special ed student and who was a general ed student. They were all engaged. And the paras were wanting to do something else because they didn't have to redirect any kids. And that meant the teacher could teach more effectively. The first grade classroom, not exactly the same because they had kids that didn't have great kindergarten instruction and some kids that had legacy missing school from COVID instruction. But most of the kids were with the gen ed teacher. 2 kids were with the interventionist, 4 kids with the ICT teacher. And then I spoke about the flip in the Acadian scores for that. And I can look at it again. Oh, they also got tons of coaching from both Edwards and Gillingham and from Foundation. So there was coaches in their building twice a month. So, it was amazing training. So at the end of 2022, the kindergartners, less than half were approaching grade level. A year later, with only 4 months of really good instruction, 60% of the kids, the same kids, were at grade level. The first graders in 2022, only a third were at grade level. A year later, by the end of second grade, 2/3. So it's really flipping. But they knew before they could even attack dyslexia, they had to fix the tier 1 instruction. because you cannot find your dyslexic kids unless you have good Tier 1 instruction.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much to everybody on this panel. And thank you so much to all of our in-person panelists. If there's anyone else in the room who wishes to testify, please make your way to the Sergeant at Arms desk in the back and fill out a witness slip. We will now move to virtual testimony. And again, to all virtual panelists, please wait for the Sergeant to announce that you may begin before delivering your testimony. Our first virtual panel, Robert Mertfeld, Daniela Maglione, Emily Hellstrom, and Janine Keeley. Robert, you may begin your testimony.
Time starts now.
In Bushwick. And can you hear me well? That's good. So I have just two very brief comments that I wanted to contribute to this wonderful meeting that you, both chairs who are still there, you Chair Joseph as well, organized. And number one, it is the statement by Chancellor Banks today about the, rollout of this reading initiative, vis-a-vis how families, particularly, were involved in the rollout and the choice of the curriculum. And so what I mean by this concretely is that you have 3 curriculums that have been chosen. And to my best knowledge, even the advisory council to the Chancellor, the Literacy Advisory Council, did not know about the choice of these 3 curriculums. So why was, for instance, Amplify, which is a curriculum vendor from Brooklyn, not chosen on the science of reading? And why was EL Education chosen and the 2 others? So that is number one. And then number 2, the key point is, we really need to, get the opt-out from teachers. We cannot tell teachers that what they've been doing was wrong, and here's something new, and we just kind of plant it onto you. And there is a section on teacher autonomy on the DOE website regarding that matter. And I think that needs to be respected. And I was a bit disappointed by the Chancellor today saying that, if you don't agree with our philosophy, you can go. I don't think that's the right approach, but his other staff was very good about this, and it was absolutely wonderful as well to see the testimonies from others, such as Joanne Simon, who has been very good about that issue. So my name is Robert Mertfeld, and I represent our PTA Advocacy Committee in the East Village at a progressive school. We are one of 4 progressive schools in District 1. And that is my testimony to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your testimony. Daniela Maglione.
Time starts now.
Okay, thank you, everyone. My name is Dr. Daniela Maglione, and I work for Pearson. I want to thank you for the opportunity to continue to work with you all in this very important initiative. As you know, dyslexia is listed as a learning disability disorder under IDEA. And as you all know, we also have national and state support in place for dyslexia. As many of you know, and it has been discussed, dyslexia is neurobiological in nature, which means that it is caused by genetic or biological factors, not ineffective teaching. Depending on the source, as you know, it's estimated that 1 in every 5 students is affected with dyslexia. And I'm also a mother and a sister to individuals with dyslexia. Now, I do have a slide deck that I sent you, and I wanted to show you some of the symptoms, causes, and risk factors for dyslexia. But I did want to note, as many of you have spoken about today, that symptoms of dyslexia can be observed even before a child begins to read, as it is a language-based disorder. So earlier intervention is essential for dyslexia. The impact of this disorder depends on the severity, the effectiveness, and the timing of the remediation. And research has shown that interventions provided to younger children are more effective and can prevent impacts to their social emotional well-being. For this reason, a comprehensive evaluation is essential in the process to co-occurring conditions with dyslexia, and those include ADHD, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, and others. As many of you know, a screener is a brief and quick measure that sorts individuals into two groups, those that are at risk and those that are not. There are two types. They're performance-based screeners as well as rating scales. Here at Pearson, we use the screen, assess, intervene, and progress monitor process. Much like a diagnosis of diabetes, when patients are diagnosed, doctors must monitor their progress to determine different treatment options and their effectiveness. Pearson does have a dyslexia toolkit that offers options for screening, as well as identification, intervention, and progress monitoring. In this model, everyone has a role, including general educators, special educators, school psychologists, speech-language pathologists, educational diagnosticians, and of course, reading specialists. When choosing a screener, it is extremely important that its accuracy be reviewed. This includes data, such as the area under the curve, often referred to as the AUC of the screeners, sensitivity, specificity, and the clinical effect size. We will be submitting a written response as well.
Time expired.
Answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony. Emily Hellstrom.
Time starts now.
I thank you so much for holding these hearings and hosting the public comment. My name is Emily Hellstrom, and I am a co-founder of an organization called Literacy Academy Collective, and we are the school support organization and advocates behind the new opening of South Bronx Literacy Academy, which is the first district public school in the nation run by NYCPS that opened a school in the South Bronx Literacy Academy that is specifically designed for students with dyslexia, language-based learning disabilities, and other struggling readers. At Literacy Academy Collective, we believe access to literacy is the most pressing civil rights issue in New York City, and it is our mission to build and support a full network of NYCPS schools to allow struggling readers to achieve academic success by bringing culturally relevant, structured literacy to students at the intersection of race, poverty, and disability. And I just wanted to say today, we opened in September to 67 families in the South Bronx that actually come from all over the Bronx. And we have a few data points to share. And so I just wanted to read them into the testimony. We had a model classroom pilot last year at PS 161. At the beginning of the year, we had 30 students who all were, 27 of whom were performing 2 to 3 years behind at a pre-K level, even though they were in 2nd and 3rd grade. And by the end of the year, our students had gained an average of 3.7 words per week compared to an expected rate of 2.2 words gained per week. For this group of students, their average growth was equivalent to moving from the 16th percentile in the Acadians measure to the 68th percentile. These are students who had not experienced academic success in the entire 3 to 4 years of their formal education. These are not just numbers. We have some feedback already from parents, and I just want to read it to you. One mom told us, at first, my daughter was complaining about why we needed to do a lot of reading things every day. She said, I'm not going to lie to you. I was happy when she said that because she's not used to it. She began spelling letters and learning their sounds. Currently, she's reading short words. For me, it is such an achievement. The things that she learned, the thing that she never learned in 2 years, she learned in a few short months. Another mom said, in the first 2 months of attending SBLA, I saw a drastic change in my son's ability to sound out words, read, and write. I was literally blown away when my son came home and started to sound out words and actually write letters.
Time expired.
His parents' first teacher conference. His teacher was able to show me side-by-side work assignments showing his handwriting from September to October. I just couldn't believe it. It was the most fulfilling moment. I was so proud, and I knew right away that I had made the best decision choosing SBLA. He went from drawing shapes and pictures to writing letters and words.
Thank you so much for your testimony. Next panelist, Janine Keeley.
Time starts now.
Another co-founder of Literacy Academy Collective. I'm not going to go through the details of our programs because Emily did such a thorough job of that, but I do want to thank the city and DOE for its support and funding. For me, this is personal. My youngest son was labeled a behavior problem at 4. He failed spelling tests, could not sound out simple words, and got up and down during library selecting books to impress his friends, even if he couldn't read them. He felt dumb, and he fell further and further behind in every subject. Instead of structured literacy intervention, his school suggested a feelings doctor. If our son were a black or brown boy, he would have had a higher chance of being labeled emotionally disturbed and recommended to a more restrictive educational setting. But we are a family with resources, and before 4th grade, which is very late, we paid for a private neuropsych exam that diagnosed him with dyslexia. We funded private tutoring twice a week, and our son finally learned to read. But he still suffers from low self-esteem and shame. If he were diagnosed and received structured literacy instruction earlier, he could have avoided 5 years of shame. Like my son, children who cannot read fall further and further behind each school year. Without intervention, they fall into the trauma trench of shame. They are at higher risk of suffering from depression, anxiety, and act out, breaking rules, engaging in risky behaviors, and in the worst case, fueling the dyslexia to prison pipeline. Avoiding these negative consequences will take money, and we hope save lots of money down the road. So I want to ask the City Council for 3 things. We want funding for Literacy Academy Collective's 2nd school in Brooklyn. We'd like to open up the 2nd one. And more close to home, we like to fund the Bleecker School. It's in Greenwich Village, a great location for middle school students with dyslexia who did not receive the instruction they needed in elementary school. And just as a side note, the city has an option to build a new school on NYU-owned property, but the option must be executed by the end of the year, or $65 million of value transfers from New York City taxpayers to NYU. And third, we'd like the city to continue to fund literacy programs for teacher training and structured literacy instruction for students of all ages. Thank you.
Thank you so much to everyone on the panel. We will now move to our next virtual panel. Naomi Pena, Yana Semiglazova, Alex Estes, Paulette Healy, and Charlene.
Time starts now.
Naomi.
Good evening. Good evening, and thank you for City Council for having us. I am actually also another co-founder of Literacy Academy Collective. I'm not going to belabor the information that's been shared, but I will tell you a little bit of my story and how I got here. I am a mom to 4 dyslexic children. My oldest is 23. My youngest are 14-year-old twins. And the reason I'm elevating that is because I am raising children of color. And 18 years ago, when I started having complaints about my son's behavior, I was being told that he was lazy, that he didn't care about his education. And it wasn't until one day he came to me and said, after getting in trouble from me and a teacher, he literally told me, I don't know what's wrong with me. It's like my brain won't let me. I will tell you that his entire academic experience was marred by bad experiences, from teachers not understanding how he learned to read or to process information, to really feeling like he was incapable of being successful. He often called himself stupid and dumb. And what ended up happening is, by the time high school hit, he completely felt deflated and not supported. He ended up going to a District 79 school so he can get his GED. But as a boy of color, a young man of color at this point, he's still my baby, he does not have any desire to continue in higher education because of his marred experience, his entire academic experience. On the flip side, 18 years later, I saw a repetition of how severe my son's dyslexia was with my younger son. And his similar situation, he was held back twice. I was told to do all sorts of reading interventions, but by this time I knew there were options. I ended up taking my 5th grader out of a traditional public school and into a private school in the city, specifically for students with dyslexia. And it turned out that he was not reading on grade level, he was reading on a 1st grade reading level. And this is just a snapshot of my household, of what happens across the city. And this is why we need to elevate these reading concerns, because we know if we do structured literacy with fidelity and across the board for everyone, 95% of all readers can read at level. And I will end it by saying, I am here to fully extend the invitation to anyone on the City Council who wants to see this in practice, because schools like SBLA and also the pilot in Harlem are getting those types of results because it's being done with fidelity and with the proper teacher training, and the students are flying and they feel successful and they feel empowered. So full invitation to everyone who wants to come. Thank you.
Thank you so much for our panelists. Yana?
Time starts now.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My 2nd grade child is in a phase 2 school, and my child doesn't get to be a 1st and a 2nd grader a second time, like you mentioned. I'm just asking that the DOE trains principals as soon as possible. I find myself, and I really had to search and find Debbie Meyer to provide more of the evidence-based information. I was constantly provided no information, misinformation by my child's school team, the principal, the assistant principal, the teachers, and the therapists. I had to get the diagnosis independently. I had to file for mediation, even after providing the prescribed intervention of the neuropsych. I called Include NYC and Advocates for Children multiple times for their help. There needs to be a better roadmap and a better information provided by school staff to parents. New York City DOE needs to ensure that literacy interventions are appropriate at every school, whether they're in a phase 1 or phase 2. You need to also provide data on independent SETS certifications and trainings, because I had to obtain Wilson certified provider lists, which include, I had to call the company myself and call each provider within my neighborhood to find out if they even receive DOE funds and are willing to work with my child. And honestly, it should not be this way. I am more educated and I was seeking out information. And I would also like to ask the Literacy Academy and the council to consider opening a school similar to the one in the Bronx in Queens. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Next up, Alex Estes.
Time starts now.
Hello, thank you for having me, and thank you for everyone for participating. I hope I can be heard. I just picked my son up from school. Yes, my biggest concern, I think, around all this, and I hate to be a wet blanket, this has been quite a cheerleading session for the science of reading. And I am not against the science of reading. I'm concerned about the co-opting of that phrase, because there is a science regarding reading, but to group an effectiveness together as a science of reading is a little remiss. Regardless, what I really would like to put forth here today is my biggest concern is the fact that, you know, this miracle of Mississippi, this miracle of Mississippi thing that keeps going over and over and over again. If one were to look into it, you can pull up, you can just type in miracle of Mississippi, science of reading, and there's an AP article. It's like the second thing that comes up. And there's a chart in there of Florida, Alabama, Mississippi, and the other Gulf state, and maybe Texas, anyway. And Florida goes up starting in 2002, and the question, of course, becomes, you know, why is Florida so, why did they do it so much earlier? And the law that they passed was just to implement simple teaching of phonics. I think what has happened is there's been a lot of curriculums that have gotten behind this idea of, well, how can we wrap up an entire curriculum just around phonics to be sold to schools? So my concern is that we are spending millions of dollars on something that could have been achieved by just the simple implementation of phonics. Now, onto the Acadian screening, which I think is very important when it comes to locating the potential students that have dyslexia. But the implementation of it, I feel like, has been off a little bit. For instance, then there's no data. I can't access any data. It's not public record for whatever reason. But even anonymized data would be nice. But I'd be curious to know how many December babies are being flagged for intervention, because the Acadian screeners are grade-based, and so we're screening all of the children, but our children are 4 months younger in each grade than the ages of everyone else who's being screened throughout the country, because of the way that we use the calendar year to dictate our ages per grade in New York. And so again, I'm worried about resources being used that don't need to be being used. We could have just, put in a phonics program years ago when Florida did it. I can't believe as a New Yorker, I'm even saying we should have done something like Florida, but here I am. And so in 2002, when they did that, they saw their scores go up, their test scores. Everyone did so well. And everyone just sat around. No one asked about it. Now it's being called the miracle of Mississippi because the science of reading has been co-opted by these curriculum corporations, which have a lot of things to sell. You can't sell phonics, you just teach it. For instance, my son's teacher teaches phonics and has for over 20 years.
Time expired.
Thank you. Thank you for your time, everyone. That's enough.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
Paulette Healy.
Time starts now.
What's what?
Hi, everyone. First, I just want to shout out the ladies of LAC. You guys are doing incredible work. And thank you so much for putting dyslexia in the forefront and being the wonderful moms that you are, providing solutions. Because Chair Joseph, as you know, when there's a problem, most likely a parent will have a solution. I just wanted to kind of reiterate, with this particular universal launch behind the science of reading, we are not talking about the importance of incorporating assistive technology into our approach. If we were to utilize some of the programs and philosophies that have perpetuated progress with the use of assistive technology and using it in a UDL type of format where it's used in the classroom so that all children, whether they have been identified or not, can benefit from it, it should go hand in hand when we're discussing literacy in our schools. I also want to talk about the importance of paras. Chair Joseph, you and I have visited schools where we really couldn't tell in the classroom who was the teacher, who was the para, and that goes towards the collaborative efforts of a universally approach where everyone is invested in making sure every child in that classroom gets the support that they need. So, it hurt my feelings a little bit when I was hearing a previous panelist talk about paras were standing around because they had nothing to do. Well, paras are not babysitters. They're actually quite intelligent and given the opportunities like PDs and resources, they have the skills to help manage the classroom as effectively as any teacher with a degree. That being said, I want to acknowledge that before interreading became one of these 3 curriculums that the Chancellor was putting forward, interreading was being used in D75 schools at the higher education level, in middle school and high schools. So it's like when we're looking at what are we going to do for our children who are not within those early intervention, ages that have not had any of these interventions that we're looking at now, it's not a matter of, oh, too bad, they're already lost to us in the system. D75 has been really perpetuating, the advances when it comes to manipulating these particular canned curriculums to format to the various degrees of disabilities in a classroom. And I'll give a big shout out to, 753K in Canarsie, which I think is in Council Member Mercedes Narcise's district. They have been doing incredible work with interreading with their high school students, so much so that for their students that are undercredited but overage, they created a worksite program called Bridges to Books, where they're actually going into elementary schools. These students, graduates from this T75 interreading program, are going into elementary schools to do reading with kindergarten and first grade children based off of the learning that they received as students. And I know I have to wrap up, so If you want more information about it, Chair Joseph, you know exactly where to find me. And the last thing I just want to say is that, as City Council, we can't have this literacy conversation if we're talking about an austerity budget that's going to cut funding to our schools and libraries. What sense does it make to teach our kids to read when they have no books to access? So I urge you all, City Council members, stand with us in making sure that there is no more austerity cuts to our schools and our families. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Charlene Parker.
Time starts now.
Hello. So I have a 8th grade son. My son is in the 8th grade. He was just recently diagnosed with dyslexia. However, my son had signs of dyslexia early on. I would say from the 1st grade. I brought these issues up. I brought my concerns up early on from when my son was in the 2nd grade. And but to no avail. It was never looked into. He was sent to have some kind of evaluation, but the evaluation through the Department of Education only showed that he needed speech therapy. So for years, my son was only receiving speech therapy. On my son's IEP, it only said that he needed speech therapy, but for years, I went back and forth with his school about the things that I was seeing, and every time I was dismissed. At every IEP meeting, I was dismissed. My concerns were dismissed. They were not looked into. So most recently, I was sent to the DOE I was sent to get my son re-evaluated because of my continued concerns. And I went to have a private evaluation, which, by the way, I was not told that I could have a private evaluation paid for by the DOE. And I did that, and it came up that my son is dyslexic. So for 7 years, my son had dyslexia, and it wasn't addressed in the classroom. That resulted in having to take the DOE to court, and it's just a long, drawn-out process that could have been prevented if someone looked into my concerns more deeply and he received the services that he needed to receive early on. So again, I just want to kind of put everything in perspective. My son is an 8th grade student. He's going to the 9th grade, but he's reading on a 5th grade level. That is concerning to me. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much to all of our virtual panelists. If the following panelists are logged on, or if there's anyone else logged on that wishes to testify, please use the raise hand feature. Tanisha Grant, Sharon Roberts, Ophelia Morris, Nicole Sherry. No hands. That concludes our virtual testimony.
And this concludes our hearing.